Holland. I'm the Chief of Staff for Senator Sanders. And I'm going to have to jump back on that call. And hopefully all those people will be joining us shortly. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brittany so you can start. And as you guys start, people will be joining on Facebook, YouTube, etc. So once again, I want to thank you all for agreeing to be part of this. And so with that, I would like to, I'm not sure who the first speaker is. I think it's Citizens Children's Committee. I think you guys are the first up. You guys could go ahead and get started with your presentation, and I'm going to switch over to Facebook Live so I can start sharing it and building an audience for you. So you guys could take a second and introduce yourselves and just give a little background on who you are, what you do, and then you can go right into your presentation. And the Senator and some other people will be joining us shortly.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Would you like to start the introductions? I'll start it. My name is Brittany Cottle. I'm a constituent liaison for Senator James Sanders Jr. Today, we are here to talk about breaking the digital divide. It's a problem that's been plaguing Queens, but Southeast Queens specifically. And we have a couple of intentions with today's forum. First, we want to lay out the facts pertinent to the digital divide and just bring general awareness to it. Secondly, we want to identify constituents that are lacking technological equipment and mobilize them and get them access to said equipment. Our third step in this process is activating our community partners and their voices and resources. And then lastly, we want to essentially close the gap. And what that would look like is a development of a coalition of grassroots and nonprofit organizations to work cohesively with companies from the public and private sector and work towards bridging this digital divide. So we can start with the CCC's introduction, and they've comprised a PowerPoint of pertinent data. And yeah, you guys can introduce yourselves and start if you like.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Senator Sanders, for the invitation to join you and everyone here today during the conference. My name is Bijan Kimirgar. I'm the Associate Executive Director for Research at Citizens Committee for Children of New York. And today I'll be co-presenting with Alice Bufkin, who's Citizen Committee for Children's Director of Child and Adolescent Policy. We really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the conversation today, but more importantly, to leverage the solutions that we discuss and those that are already being discussed in all of our ongoing work to address the digital divide and put these solutions into action, as you were saying, Brittany. Today, if it's the first time you're learning about Citizens Committee for Children, I can share a very brief introduction. We are a nonpartisan organization, a nonprofit organization as well, that informs and mobilizes New Yorkers to make the city a better place for children. We've been around for 75 years, and through that time, we've refined an approach to child advocacy that combines research and data analysis with civic and community engagement and policy and advocacy campaigns. I'll be sharing data on household internet access in New York City broadly and in New York State's 10th senatorial district specifically. And Alice Bufkin will be sharing the policy considerations and advocacy work that CCC has been putting into practice over the recent months to address the digital divide and other aspects that relate to internet accessibility. With that, I'll get into some of the data. Internet access in New York City broadly and in New York State's. I'm hearing myself, but it's okay. So with each of the slides, I'll be sharing maps and charts, and I'll talk through them a little bit so that you all have a understanding and clarity on what's on the screen if it's a little bit fuzzy. When we look at New York City as a whole, we see that there are 470,000 households that lack internet access, period. There are some communities that have less access. So in some parts of the South Bronx, parts of Queens, Brooklyn, even Staten Island, there are at least 1 in 4 households that lack internet access. As a whole, we see that there are. I do have a little bit of an echo of myself. Maybe someone could mute their microphone, please. There are some communities that have. Today, I'll be sharing also data not just on the city as a whole, but on this the 10th Senate District. And when we look at this area specifically by the census tract, we see that internet access, like the city, is not even. So where there are the yellowish colors means that there's a smaller share of households without internet access, so between 5 and 9%. And where we see the darker blue, parts of Jamaica and a portion of Far Rockaway, here's where there's at least 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 households that lack internet access at all. So this is important to understand that the digital divide is something that is geographic as well as it is demographic. And this is what I'll be speaking about next. The good news is that overall access to the internet citywide has improved, but there still remains some important discrepancies that we need to address. So while in 2015, there were about 1 in 4 households that didn't have internet, and that's gone down to about 15% of households. Still, we see that in 2019, if a household was earning less than $20,000 a year, 37% of those households lacked internet access, whereas only 5% of households earning $75,000 or more. So it's one portion of affordability as much as it is access to a connection or to devices, which income plays a role to as well. When we think about income specifically in the New York State's 10th district or Senate district, again, the yellow portions of the map show that there's a smaller share of folks in this particular indicator, which is poverty. So, for example, in Springfield Gardens, there's a lower share in some census tracts of people living on incomes that are at or below the poverty level. However, in areas of Far Rockaway, there's a greater share. So the darker blue areas are between 30 and 36% of the population living at or below poverty level. The numbers for this are that, for example, a family of 4 would be making less than $25,000 annually. And another important component of internet access is not just the affordability, but how you're accessing it might also determine whether you're experiencing aspects of the digital divide. So here we're looking at information for households that access internet exclusively via cellular data plans. So while you can have broadband access in your home via computer, some folks are only accessing the internet through their mobile phones. Of note here is that Jamaica, which part of it comprises the 10th senatorial district, ranks first in the share of households that are accessing internet only through cellular data plans. This is really, again, changes the way that people interact with the data. This is also true for other portions of the district. Queens Village, which is the community district shown just to the east of Jamaica, which has a similar about 1 in 4 households accessing internet only by their cell phone. And then although it's occluded by the little text box there, in the Rockaways, it's about 17% of families, or I should say households, accessing internet only through cellular data. One of the last maps that I'll share with you before we transition to some of the policy work that CCC is working on is the availability of internet service providers throughout the city. Again, the yellow areas show that there's the yellow areas show that there's between 0 and 7% of the population of households, I should say, that have only one internet service provider. The idea here is that if you have a greater number of internet service providers, there's more opportunities or options for having a plan that might work for you, or just greater access to broadband. Areas where there's the darker colors, so the green and then teal and then blue and darker blue, those are where there's a higher share of households that have access to only one internet service provider. For the areas of the 10th Senate, New York State Senate District, we see that they're between 7 and 36% of households that have, around 7 and 36% of households that have only one internet service provider. And the place where there would probably be more attention paid is in the Hamels, Rockaway area, where about 23% of homes have only one internet service provider available. I just want to say before transitioning to my colleague Alice Bufkin that these and other data are available at our online database, data.cccnewyork.org, where all of the maps are interactive. You can look at the data by different breakdowns in terms of racial ethnic disparities, gender disparities, or any time that we have data that we can disaggregate by meaningful ways, we do so. And I encourage you to take a look at our website to learn more. And with that, I'm happy to transition to my colleague, Alice. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bijan. And thank you. I'll echo Bijan saying thank you for inviting us and for holding this forum. I think it's really important. As Bijan said, my name is Alice Bufkin. I am the Director of Policy for Child and Adolescent Health at Citizens Committee for Children. So I'm going to speak to some of the key challenges and issues that are essential to address if we as a city and a state want to combat the digital divide. So Bijan, if you can move to the next slide. So as Bijan laid out, there are widespread and deep disparities throughout the city in the ability to reliably connect to the internet. I first want to briefly touch on some of the ways that the digital divide impacts New Yorkers and really highlight the reason it's so critical for our city and our state to address these issues. So I think one of the most clear and widely discussed harms of the digital divide is in severe and widespread learning loss that it's causing and continues to cause for students in the city. More than half of New York City students have opted for remote schooling. And as I think we're all aware, it is looking like there's a good chance we may be moving back to remote schooling as early as this week. What we've seen is too many students without reliable internet have had to take extreme efforts to get internet, including finding Link NYC stations or hanging outside of libraries. And unfortunately, far too many students are simply not able to engage in learning at all. We hear about students who have essentially been entirely disconnected from learning since remote schooling began. The schools where at least half the student, and what we also know is that there are clear racial divisions in access to education. The schools where at least half the student population are Black or Latinx are nearly 8 times more likely to report low engagement levels or poor attendance, while schools where 25% or more of the student population is white show high engagement levels. What this means is that we as a city and a state are failing our moral and legal obligation to ensure that every child receives a free and public education. And the long-term consequences for children who are missing months and months of schooling, disproportionately impacting children of color, could have devastating repercussions long-term. In terms of public benefits, a lot of city and state agencies have done really good and important work in transitioning enrollment in social services like SNAP, Medicaid, rental assistance, transitioning those things online and making new flexibilities so it's easier for people to access them. But for those without reliable internet, accessing these services can be nearly impossible if they aren't offered in person. These services can be even harder to access for those who are in homeless shelters, as most shelters don't have Wi-Fi or have really inconsistent connections. Many shelter residents lost their ability to connect to health or mental health services when these services moved online. And so many of the ways we have of seeking housing assistance and job placements, these are online, making it even harder for those in shelter to find work or permanent housing. And then again, families in the foster care system are another population facing new challenges connecting with their families or accessing essential services. Across these and other areas, we're also seeing, again, the disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities who faced historic racism and systemic inequities. I think one clear indication of this can be seen when you realize that many of those same communities most lacking internet tend to align with those neighborhoods that experienced redlining, one of many racist housing policies in New York's history that continues to impact New Yorkers today. So Bijan, if you want to move to the next slide. So what are some ways we can combat this? I don't want to spend an excessive amount of time talking about the different strategies for achieving universal high quality internet, because I think that will probably be a major topic of this entire forum, including the next presentation. But I do want to at least lay the groundwork on some proposals out there, because the reality is that, as Bijan's presentation made clear, internet access is simply not affordable or accessible for too many New Yorkers. So one proposal out there is the idea of a public-private partnership with internet service providers. And in fact, the mayor's internet master plan relies heavily on this, proposing that the city contract with multiple ISPs to fill in those existing gaps in service, and then use city real estate and municipal buildings to facilitate the expansion of service, with an ultimate goal of having universal broadband. And I believe there's actually either an RFP out or about to be out for that proposal. There are also opportunities to help subsidize broadband and internet access for low-income families, both by negotiating with ISPs for lower rates and by providing financial support to families who can't afford quality internet. And the city comptroller actually has a proposal for internet passports. This plan would help individuals to purchase broadband service within the ISP in their area. And then there are proposals for a public or municipal model for broadband, where the city would form its own broadband network. This model is driven in part out of the recognition that for all the discounts and supports that ISPs may offer during this crisis, many of these offers are temporary. And the bottom line of an ISP is ultimately to make a profit. And providing high-speed internet to low-income families or those in hard-to-reach areas is usually not profitable for private companies. So through a city-funded broadband network, these services would be provided for a fee for those who would afford them, or for free for those in areas of greatest need. The city would have oversight of the network, and so could control things like prices and speed and privacy. Obviously, this would be a very expensive endeavor, but there has been some precedent for that in Chattanooga, for example. So again, I don't want to dwell on these options too long, because I think they'll be discussed at length today, along with a lot of other, I'm sure, really complex and well thought out thoughts on how to approach this. But I think in all the conversation, we have to acknowledge that in 2020 in particular, high-speed internet is not a luxury. It's a basic need and a human right. It's critical for ensuring people can access education, healthcare, social services, and it's our responsibility to figure out how to make it universal for everyone, regardless of income, race, or neighborhood. So Bijan, if you want to move to the next. So as we're continuing to grapple with sort of long-term strategies to ensure universal broadband, though we know that in this moment, it's important to start with those who have the most acute needs and try to get them connected. So one of the biggest priority groups for CCC and many of our partners is students who lack an internet connected device. The DOE has provided 320,000 or so tablets to students, and another 100,000 or so are being ordered. But we know, certainly anecdotally, that some students are still being left behind. And I spoke earlier in this presentation about the long-term repercussions and harms of learning loss. We still have work to do to make sure every student has an internet connected device and the ability to connect to a reliable internet network. And this is especially true for students in temporary housing. And I want to be clear, when I say students in temporary housing, I mean students in shelters, but also students who are in hotels or other temporary setups, or those who are doubled up, meaning they are sharing housing with others. There are about 105,000 students in temporary housing, and about 15,000 of those are in shelter. Most homeless shelters lack Wi-Fi, and some don't even have cellular reception. The city recently committed to providing all family shelters in New York City with Wi-Fi, but it is seeming like that wouldn't happen until the summer. And so what that means is that children who are already struggling in homeless shelter, who are dealing with crowded situations, instability, uncertainty, they may just not be able to attend school, or attend extremely sporadically, especially if we will be moving back towards a remote only setup. So that's unacceptable, but it also violates federal law, which guarantees homeless youth and children of homeless individuals equal access to the same free, appropriate public education as provided to all other students. The same goes for NYCHA and public housing, which need additional capital investment in internet services, and not just in terms of Wi-Fi, but ideally in terms of internet-ready devices and things like printers. So these aren't the only priority areas, but they are among the areas that need our most urgent attention. Next slide, please. So another area I want to touch on is increasing digital literacy and resources and streamlining technical assistance. So something I do want to make clear in this presentation is that the digital divide is not just about internet and devices. Even if we make serious inroads in internet access, there would still be complex challenges in connecting everyone. And so one of those challenges is around digital literacy. Many people, particularly older New Yorkers, don't necessarily have the training they need to conduct so many important activities online. And training isn't just needed for those who are receiving services. Providers also struggle with new technology or understanding what the best practices are for delivering services online in this brand new way for many people, whether that's health services or education or something else. We need to invest in training and make sure those providing services have the equipment they need to deliver care. We also need to make serious improvements in how our city is supporting students and others who are using internet connected devices. So it is, really remarkable the job DOE has done in getting devices out to so many students. But we and partners in the field hear over and over about challenges making a device work, wait lists when parents are trying to call in to get a device fixed, calls that aren't answered when students can't connect to the internet. Parents of students are left not knowing where to get help, which means that even with a device, they're not able to connect to services. So we really need a more streamlined way to assist New Yorkers who are having device and connectivity issues. And one important aspect of that is in equipping schools with appropriate technology assistance for their educators and students. So, I think we all know that even on the best of days, a school might only have one staff member assigned to deal with the school's technology issues. Now imagine an entire school shifting to digital learning, but without the infrastructure to support all the challenges that are bound to occur. So that's an area we need to really look into. And finally, we need to do a better job conveying information to immigrants and English language learners. Things are changing so rapidly every day, again, evident by the school setting we're looking at for this upcoming week. It's a confusing time for everyone, but if additional effort isn't put into reaching out to immigrant communities and providing outreach materials in languages other than English, we're going to see a bigger and bigger divide between who does and doesn't get connected to services. So the other piece I want to touch on now is sort of related to one specific subset of the digital divide and teleservices, which is telehealth. So COVID has, this crisis has in a lot of ways allowed us to speed up telehealth progress in a positive way. We now have new systems in place to provide services over the internet or by phone, which can be particularly important for people receiving mental health services, for example. So these new flexibilities have increased access for a lot of people who grapple traditionally with transportation or childcare or work schedules that can make it hard to get in-person services. So there's real potential to improve equity by making these flexibilities permanent and not just part of sort of this crisis moment. But I'll talk about this a bit more in the next slide. We also need to make sure that everyone can equally access those services, because if we don't, we are at risk of widening a divide that already exists in terms of health disparities. And importantly, the needs of individuals and families always need to be prioritized. We don't want to risk a two-tiered system where some families receive services primarily in person and others receive them only via telehealth. So I think the early intervention program is one example of that. This is a program available to children birth to 3 with developmental delays or disabilities. And while it's working really well for some in this remote transition, you can imagine that for, say, a 2-year-old trying to get therapies via an iPad, that's a really challenging proposition. And so providers are doing their best to sort of figure out how do we keep families connected. But if in a future world we continue to provide telehealth, we don't want a situation where, for instance, wealthier and whiter neighborhoods are getting in-person services, where those communities in low-income communities of color are only getting telehealth services. So telehealth has enormous potential, but we have to provide it carefully with a real eye towards equity to make sure we are maximizing access in a way that is really fitting the needs of individual families. Bijan, if you want to move to the next slide. So something I want to speak to is some of those, again, individuals and families who are really at risk or have been left behind. And this is where I want to reiterate that the digital divide is not just about internet and it's not just about devices. It is more complex than that, because even with those items, we know that the shift to teleservices is going to continue to leave people behind if we're not careful, thoughtful, and don't commit resources to making sure we have an equitable system. So if we think about some of the populations of people who struggle to access services online, we can start with families and providers who lack privacy. So I think many on this call are very familiar with that, what that's like, trying to provide education to a child who may be sharing a room with siblings of the same age, who may be in a place where they can't privately receive therapy services, and trying to have those confidential conversations. Whether you're receiving services or you're providing those services, you may also be dealing with those same issues of trying to provide confidential care or thoughtful care without the ideal setup. LGBTQ youth are also an area we need to pay attention to, because if they are in a housing environment that is not very private, that's not supportive, you can understand why this new mode of delivery could really put their safety at risk and inhibit their ability to access things like confidential therapy services or something else like that. I already talked about very young children. So thinking about how challenging it is to deliver therapies and developmental services to young children via sort of this online mode. So what are we going to do about those children who fall behind developmentally because they can no longer get services in person? We also have children with special needs or those who are medically fragile who may struggle to access services online, or maybe online services just can't meet their needs the way they did in person. Folks with visual impairments, hearing impairments, or other disabilities may struggle with the telehealth platforms if they're not designed to actually meet their needs. And this country also has a history of racist medical practice, from discriminatory healthcare systems to race-based medical experimentation and exploitation. For Black and Brown communities, historic racism in the medical field may contribute to distrust of telehealth and other digital services without real effort to address these issues. So these are just some of the populations that are at risk of being left behind. And we're looking at months of learning loss, months of unmet mental health needs, months of lost public benefits. It's not enough to fix the digital divide in a few months or even tomorrow. What are we going to do to reach back to those who missed out on these essential services because of the digital divide? We have a real obligation as a city and a state to identify those who were left behind and invest the resources necessary to assist them and make them whole. So I really would just want to reiterate that, because we are seeing people suffer so much because of this pandemic, and we need to have a coordinated and proactive strategy for reaching these New Yorkers. And last slide, please. Finally, that brings us to the importance of engaging communities in identifying challenges and solutions. So the reason we, CCC, knows so much about issues on the ground is because we're hearing from families and providers about these challenges they're facing. I think stakeholders in technology and nonprofits, and they're all important. We're all important to be in these conversations. But to really identify the challenges that are facing people on the ground and develop solutions, we need to find ways to listen to and engage communities in these efforts. So I was, really happy to hear sort of the framing up top of this forum of the importance of building a broad coalition that's involving stakeholders from all over, including sort of that grassroots element of hearing what are those pieces, because we need to address the really big glaring issues around the digital divide. But we also need to focus on sort of the populations that are most likely to get left behind historically, and especially now, if we're not also having really thoughtful conversations on how do we bridge the divide for them in all the different ways that might mean. So that sort of concludes our side of the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions if we have time, but if not, this is the contact information for me and Bijan, and we're always happy to talk to folks and answer questions.
Sorry, the host had me muted. There's no current questions at this moment, so we'll just circle back around, okay? And Francella, you can begin whenever you're ready.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm really excited to follow up on that. Today, as Brittany mentioned, my name is Francella. I run Next Century Cities, a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. And I just wanted to start by number one, thanking Bijan and Alice for sharing so much information. There are actually some of the statistics that overlap with some of the things that I'll go over today. And I also want to thank Senator Sanders, not only for the invite, but really for being willing to champion this issue. This is something that is hard to tackle because it's so enormous. And I think it's really important for us to just find somewhere to start. And also, thank you so much, Brittany, and also Marvin, for your help organizing the presentations today. I do want to start by also I'll be sharing my presentation, and I encourage questions if there are any, but I want to take you on this journey because this is something that really, it doesn't matter what community you're in, you have to do this together. This is not something that anyone can solve with any one entity, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're a community organization. This is something that is a team lift that is going to have to engage a variety of stakeholders if you want it to be effective. So I'll start by just telling you a little bit about my organization, and then also moving on to some ways where you might be able to be effective in your neighborhood. First, I'll tell you that Next Century Cities, we are a 501c3 nonprofit based, as I said, in Washington, D.C. We represent municipalities across the country in over 40 states. We have over 200 member municipalities, including members in New York, like Rochester, Syracuse, Schenectady, Jamestown. And what we focus on is really making sure that we're supporting local efforts to expand broadband connectivity. That means that we might be supporting their efforts to work on access. We might be working on their efforts to support adoption. We might provide resources and materials, but what we're looking to do is to help people understand the intersections between connectivity and all of the other things that we have as shared goals. For us, it's not just about being connected for the sake of being connected. It's so that people can be connected to enable the things that they care about. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things that we see as direct correlations in between widespread broadband access and also adoption. Talk about people being able to have access and also high adoption rates. And I say those two words. What we're thinking about is making sure that your broadband access relates directly to educational outcomes in certain areas. So the thing is, this isn't just about K through 12 students. I always want to remind people, people are living longer. You aren't just having one career. So there is going to be a time once you leave K through 12, whether people are going back to colleges, vocational schools, going back to retrain once they've left their first career and are transitioning to another, or finding ways to set up their own businesses. A lot of that education happens online, and very often people who don't have school-age children in the households miss out on opportunities to get access to learning opportunities. Also, we see broadband as directly related to economic mobility for residents. Often it's not enough for us to talk about people being a part of the future of work, because as long as you don't have access, you are limited by your geography. I say that intentionally because here in DC, if I were to apply for a job, maybe just across the border in Maryland or Virginia, if I don't have broadband access, I'm limited by what time does the train stop running? Do I have childcare while I'm gone? There are all sorts of calculations that essentially tie me to my zip code in my neighborhood that might prevent me from being able to take advantage of economic opportunities that might be just across the border. And so when people have broadband access, it helps eliminate some of those geographic borders and allows families to be able to move and explore other possibilities. As came up in the previous presentation, there is a direct relationship in between people who have access and better health outcomes. This is not only about being able to just make an appointment, but we know in places where there are where people are not necessarily taking getting preventative care, maybe they wait until emergency care. Well, that's where broadband access might be helpful, where we can actually make sure that people are getting ongoing wellness care that they need rather than just waiting for emergency care. And that is everybody's problem. So we really need to think about it, whether you're the person with insurance or the person without insurance, that's all of us that share the cost in that. We also see broadband as a specific tool to help promote civic engagement. It doesn't matter if we're talking about getting out the vote or reporting potholes to your mayor, or being able to transmit your ideas for what should be on the town hall meeting. Those are things that happen, whether it's online, through applications that actually help build citizenry, build engagement between citizens and government. And so it's not only important for the citizens, but it's also important to build transparency for the people who govern them. So it's really important that we have avenues of communication where people can not only see what's happening, but actually participate in the change that they're asking for. And then finally, I did want to flag something that doesn't often come up, but is really important, that broadband access is really an essential tool for not only emergency response and general public safety, but it's also part of what helps people, communities achieve environmental goals. When we're putting in smart city applications for people to measure whether or not you have clean water or the air quality in your area, those are places that those applications tend to benefit neighborhoods that are highly connected, even if the poorly connected neighborhoods are contributing to that cost. So what we want to make sure is that there's actually a shared benefit between all residents in communities. So I want to dig in just to make sure that we're all on the same page about talking about the difference between access and adoption. And I don't want to miss an opportunity to make sure that we're all speaking with the same vocabulary. When people are talking about access, that refers specifically to the digital infrastructure. Does a household have access to whether it's the wires going into their community? Do you have coax cable versus fiber? Do you have a fixed wireless solution? There are lots of ways that you can do it. But what's really important when we're talking about access has to do with the actual piping that's going into your neighborhoods that enables high-speed connectivity. Now, why do we call it broadband? Broadband refers to the FCC's definition of the measurement of the speed. So if you have high-speed connectivity, for example, you might have DSL. So DSL relies on a phone line. what we're looking for is the measurement of the speeds that are actually piping into your home. So if you have a connection that meets the minimum 25.3 minimum speeds, so that means that you have 25 megabits per second downloads and 3 megabits per second uploads, that meets the minimum definition of broadband. But what we found out during COVID is that when people are forced at home, you're having to do a lot more video teleconferencing and high bandwidth applications. That upload speed at 3 megabits per second, that's where you're going to see the drag. And so that is why you'll hear sometimes advocates asking, is 25.3 adequate? Because also very often when people subscribe to that measurement, that's what you're subscribing to advertised speeds. That is not necessarily the measurement that's being piped into your home. Also, I wanted to point out specific to New York City, one of the things that was actually noted in the New York City's master plan that was published last year was that many neighborhoods in Brooklyn and in Queens that don't have as much access to either the utility poles or the conduit, and conduits referring to the actual wires, they lack the infrastructure in a lot of these neighborhoods. So the thing is, you're in this awkward conundrum where you're saying, we don't even have the actual physical infrastructure to improve connectivity. So that's when we need to start thinking about, is it that we need a wireless solution to substitute, or is it that we need to go in and do a build? And to some of the examples that came up earlier today, that's when you start asking questions about, is it that we need a provider to go in and add wires, or is it that we want the city to go and essentially erect its own network to serve parts of the populations that wouldn't be profitable to a private stakeholder? Now, when we talk about adoption, that is talking about whether or not a family can actually subscribe to broadband. So when I ask a really simple question, I'm from Louisiana. If I went and asked somebody if they subscribe to broadband, they'd probably tell me, I don't know, what is that? But if I ask them, do you have internet? They get that. So what we're asking about is, do you have an actual subscription, whether it's via phone or maybe you have it bundled with your cable? Do you have a fixed subscription or even a wireless subscription? So what we know about that is that when we're talking about adoption, very often affordability, access to equipment, the gaps in digital literacy, these are all primary reasons why people don't adopt. So even though you have neighborhoods where they might actually have service available, households might not actually adopt that service for some of those reasons. So when we're talking about closing the digital divide, we really have to ask questions about, how are we providing the community supports that maybe support digital literacy, or how do we make sure that all of the households that maybe they have the service available in their neighborhoods, but they haven't been able to at least maintain ongoing subscriptions. One of the things that I wanted to point out specifically in New York is that when we're thinking about, especially during the COVID pandemic, when we have a lot of at-risk populations, when we're talking about nationwide, at-risk populations are very often people with limited mobility or income. So we might be talking about low-income populations, seniors, people with disabilities. Those are the people that we're always thinking about. Do they actually have access to all of those things that enable households to benefit from digital access? Also, specifically in New York, one of the things that came up earlier, and that was in Bijan's presentation, about 26% of households, specifically in the Jamaican neighborhood, rely exclusively on their cell phones for broadband access. I do want to point out that that is something that actually tracks a nationwide statistic when we're talking about Black and brown households, where they disproportionately rely on their phones for broadband access. The reason why that's a digital equity issue is that, quite frankly, if I ask somebody to last with their phone all day long, for you to go to work, not only to send emails, but to create reports, maybe to log on to a remote learning platform, would it really be fair to compare the people who had access only via phone with the performance of the people who had access via laptop or computer? And so we really need to ask questions about, is it fair? Not can they get on, but is it fair? And that's when it starts to invoke some of the digital equity principles that we're concerned about. I do want to give a little bit of landscaping here to talk about what's happening in the larger picture in terms of the federal programs and then also in New York State. First, I want to point out that both the federal and many state programs, they often focus on broadband access. So very often when you're talking about nationwide conversations about the digital divide, and you're also talking about the funding that comes out of the federal government to support it, those projects are almost exclusively aimed at making sure that communities get digital infrastructure. Adoption, however, is the primary obstacle in Black and brown neighborhoods, and specifically in Southeast Queens. So we need to ask questions about that from the outset, because we know that if there's funding available, it still might not solve the problem that we're trying to get at that's most pervasive in Southeast Queens neighborhoods. So specifically, the Federal Communications Commission is the federal agency that is responsible for bringing high-speed connectivity within reach for every single resident in the United States. Their funding historically supports broadband network expansion in communities that are marked as both unserved or underserved. The way that the federal government determines whether your neighborhood is served or unserved is that providers, so maybe whether it's Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, Charter, whoever's your provider, they turn in a form called Form 477, and that gives data on whether or not a specific area is served. To determine whether or not an entire census block is served, only one household on that census tract has to be able to get service without any extraordinary measure. That is part of the reason why so much of the data is distorted, because that doesn't actually report whether or not someone is able to subscribe. And it also distorts what type of speeds they are getting at those places. And then also taking it a step further, if we're trying to address questions about affordability, we also need to know what is that pricing information, which is not required on Form 477 data. Turning to state and local programs, those are programs that are often left to fill in the gaps on broadband adoption. But the problem with that is that, especially in light of COVID, where you have state and local government budgets, which have been completely devastated by the economic fallout of the pandemic, they're essentially scrambling to come up with solutions to increase adoption. So when we're looking nationwide, some of the statistics that you heard about in Southwest Queens are very much a reflection of what's happening in the larger populations. We know that nationwide, if you're in a household that's at or below $30,000, there's approximately over 40% of those adults are struggling with reliable access to broadband. And I wanted to point out specifically, this isn't necessarily about you being able to just subscribe once, and then maybe you take a month off because you can't pay your bill. But we're talking about, are you able to maintain connectivity throughout? Also, we know that specifically in lower income households, that's where you're going to see the homework gap surface. That's where the approximately 16 million students are unable to access either the connectivity in terms of the subscription or the devices to be able to comply with remote learning mandates or complete homework assignments at home. We know that low-income households are the least likely to be able to overcome those obstacles to adoption. So that's where we're talking about. They're struggling with access to devices, might not be able to maintain subscriptions. Once they get the access, do they have the digital literacy to do it? And then also importantly, do they have the tech support to be able to maintain those subscriptions? So what are the bigger implications of that? Because I don't want that to get lost in this conversation. There are long-term effects if we do not find a way to solve this problem. When we're talking about how this impacts the future of work, we know that this work from home model that's been promoted essentially during the COVID pandemic is going to be with us for some time. But for people who don't have access at home, they do not have the same economic opportunities. So while we've shifted the general model, we know that we've also eliminated possibilities for a lot of people who don't have access. Nationwide, I wanted to point out an important statistic from Deutsche Bank report. Deutsche Bank is not in the business of talking about the digital divide. They very rarely I have never run into them on a circuit, doesn't matter where I have traveled across the country. And they just published a report that said specifically nationwide, 76% of African Americans and 62% of Hispanic Americans could get shut out or be underprepared for 86% of the jobs by 2045. Why does that matter? In your neighborhood, these are the statistics that we're grappling with. It is largely Black and brown households that do not have the digital access that they need to actually participate in this economic revolution. So when we're talking about also, what's the residual effect of that? Because this isn't just about a job, right? This is about what happens when we start seeing how does that transition to how that applies to how people have access to wealth. So we know that cycles of poverty are tied directly to the digital divide, because where you find poverty, you will find the digital divide. So when we're talking about, okay, we know that in those households they're struggling with access, what does that mean in New York City? Well, we know that approximately 40% of New York households don't have some sort of fixed broadband at home, whether it's a combination of cell phone and fixed access. That means that approximately 18% of residents are struggling with reliable connectivity. And again, I do want to point out something. Fixed and wireless access are two separate things. If I am able to get onto my cell phone, maybe I do some applications and things like that, when I have to do work, I'm going to be able to transition to my computer. I'm going to be able to pick up a signal in my house, a secure signal, and I'm going to be able to get online seamlessly. That is what we're asking for all residents to be able to enjoy it. Because if you have a limitation with something that you can do on your cell phone, but you can't do on but you don't have a desktop, or you don't have some sort of fixed access, that's a problem for everyone. I also wanted to point out something very important that came up in a McKinsey consulting report at the end of 2019. Even they were concerned that Black and Hispanic Americans were underrepresented in 7 of the 8 highest paying industries in the US. That is a big deal. The reason why is because we're seeing the residual effects in our communities where more and more the people who are stuck in cycles of poverty are stuck. We just say, oh, we hope they get better jobs. Can we get them some opportunities? But the people who are getting more and more and more, they have access to wealth. And so we really need to think about, if we're serious about equity, if we're serious about equality, what do we do to help close that gap that's not only in the digital divide, but a larger reflection of what's happening in the economy? So the challenge before us is, what do we do next? How do we empower every single stakeholder, whether you're a government official, a private sector ally, a philanthropic partner, or just a concerned citizen, to actually claim a piece of this? I meant this sincerely when I don't think this is something that any one person can do alone. It's something that we're really going to need to think about. Is it possible for us to solve this problem piece by piece? Maybe that means that we have citizens who are asking questions about what can we do about digital literacy, or actually volunteering their time to say there's more that we have human capital, even if we don't have money. What are we doing to ask our local officials, state officials, and federal officials to make sure that we have policies that actually recognize the need? What are we doing to engage our private sector allies to actually recognize the fact that maybe they're concerned about profits, but at the end of the day, they are also residents of our communities. So what are we doing to tap into that goodwill, to make sure that they actually have a part of that? And also to recognize whether it's a private sector or a public partner to actually say, job well done, I want to join you. There are lots of ways that advocates and citizens can be involved in this. This is something that maybe it means that you write an op-ed about what's happening in your community. Maybe you share authentic stories about what's happening. You might make a short YouTube video or a post to make sure that you're actually documenting it. Documentaries do not need to be made by formal filmmakers. They might be made by 2 or 3 minute clips. But I think it's really important for people to recognize that there is a place for all of you in this work. But I think the first step is going to be in being able to quantify the problem, because as long as we're talking about the digital divide as this really antiseptic statistic, what we're missing out on is, we talk about what does it cost to solve this problem? What are we going to have to invest in the digital infrastructure and the ongoing needs? This is something that we also have to think about. What does it cost if we don't fix it? What are we missing out on when we literally have millions of people and thousands of them in Southeast Queens that are essentially locked out of possibilities, and we are in turn locked out of their imagination and contributions as well? So thank you so much. I'm always happy to answer questions. We can't hear you, Brittany.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. I want to know, what are some examples of some tangible reforms that have been, set in place in other cities or countries towards tackling the digital divide?
So when you talk about reform, so for example, one of the things I heard earlier today, Alice mentioned something about Chattanooga. Chattanooga is one example of a community partnership. There are lots of both municipal, maybe I should back up, municipal and community networks. There's a difference. Municipal networks are run by the government. By the local government, and community networks might be, you might have a co-op, you might have, there are lots of ways to do it. So maybe the local government might actually create the infrastructure like an Ammon model, Ammon, Idaho, and then you have ISPs come and tap into that infrastructure. There are several ways to do it. The first step in a lot of states is that they actually have to eliminate the state barriers to community networks, because usually in about 24 states, there are actual bars to community networks. And part of that is a result of great lobbying on the side of private sector partners. But part of that is that I think, quite frankly, our legislative system didn't really contemplate governments running their own ISPs. So I think that it's a matter of, this is a new technology and everybody's along for this ride and trying to understand. One of the first things that some communities have to do, I know like in Louisiana, Washington, several states have had to actually declare it as a utility. And so as much as we talk amorphously about, oh, it's essential and oh, it's critical and it's essentially the electricity of our day, the reality is that it's not recognized that way on paper. So when you are in places like, for example, San Antonio, Texas, in order for residents to actually use CARES Act funding, they decided, look, we're going to declare it as essential so that people, just like they can use a voucher to get relief for either rent or electricity, they can also do that for their broadband bill. So there are some local government hurdles that need to be overcome in terms of like fixing ordinances. There are also some state hurdles just against barring community networks overall. But I think that one of the things that's right in front of us that's a hurdle is the fact that it's really hard to quantify this issue. The part we can do is to say who has access. That's the easy stuff, because you can put it on a map. You can say, I see that piping right there. Who's got fiber? Who's got this, right? I get it. But the part about adoption, about is it affordable? There is no universal answer to what is affordable broadband, right? So we're all struggling with what's that number? What's that magic number? Because especially in somewhere like Southwest Queens, Southeast Queens, you guys actually have a higher median income than the rest of than the average of the United States. However, you also have 7% of your residents at the poverty level. So that's still complicated, and that's a number pre-COVID. So that's not going to get easier as we have, further closures and people are scrambling. And also remember, certain federal programs are going to be eliminated on December 31st. So you're going to see new waves of poverty. So what are we doing to accommodate that? Because quite frankly, we cannot survive on the generosity of private sector partners and philanthropic endeavors. We can't survive on that. So just in the same way that we thought about, bringing electricity to rural homes when it was early in the 19th century, when that was something that was only in urban centers and wealthy neighborhoods, or the same way we thought about connecting super highways across the United States and invested over $500 million, which did not exist. The same way we made those commitments, we're going to have to start thinking about what do we need as a nation in the big picture? What do we need in our states? Like, what are you asking for from your state government and making a specific ask? And then in neighborhoods are going to have to support the ongoing digital literacy, because what it took to run my phone today is very different than 5 years ago, and it will be very different 5 years from today. So we're going to need community partnerships that support that ongoing benchmark of digital literacy, and also privacy issues that people are not thinking about and do not have the capacity to address because they're focused on other fires. So when we have people, there was something that Alice brought up in the other presentation about in housing, homeless shelters, and for foster kids using Wi-Fi networks. The problem that we have is that it's great. That's awesome. That's an easy fix, right? We got them on Wi-Fi networks. The problem is when you're using some of those networks, you have to agree to these disclosures that say, we can share this information, search this information. So you're essentially you're in duress. You're essentially like, this is my only way to get connected. So I agree, right? You don't even know what you agreed to. I agree. And so we need to ask questions about what are we agreeing to when we're based on a society that is more and more using that data as currency, right? So the thing is, if we are using that as currency, and the people who have more resources get better protection, and the people who rely on Wi-Fi networks get no protection, then again, we have this gap in wealth. Because now the people who are the least resourced and the most disadvantaged, not only have the fewest economic opportunities, but they also have the least amount of privacy and will continue to be monetized. Their information will be monetized. So there are other dynamics in this that aren't just about connected for the sake of connectivity. I think what we need to really think about is, when we're thinking about not just the digital divide, but really thinking about making sure our policies reflect our values, right? Because if we really believe everybody should have the same opportunities, what we know is that we're in a digital revolution. And what we know is that the people who are the most connected, who speak the language, not I opened an email because Bank of America told me I needed one, but the people who speak the language online are the people who are able to be creators and contributors and be able to run businesses. The people who just got on because they're like, I can't get my SNAP benefit unless I do it online because the office is closed. They don't have as many options. So I think we need to be authentic about that and also talk about the fact that at the source of this, there's the shame of poverty. And the reason why we talk a lot about the homework gap is because people don't mind talking about kids, that's fine. Because adults who are poor, it's because they didn't try hard enough. It's this awkward dynamic, and it's okay for us to claim that, right? Because what we need to do is think about, okay, what's my part? So if my part is to bring it up at the town hall meeting and that's my contribution, high five, that's yours. If your part is to write an op-ed and say, this is what I want to see in my neighborhood, awesome. If you want to reach out to Comcast and say, I need you to support this, great. If you want to, like one of the neighborhoods that came up in Bijan's presentation in Hunts Point, what's happening at the Point is such a beautiful program where they're essentially teaching kids to be digital stewards and extend Wi-Fi networks. That is in bilingual. Like, what is that? That doesn't happen anywhere in the US. So, I mean, that's a big deal. So let's high five it when people get it right and focus on putting supports there. And when people aren't getting it right, tell them your story. Because even if they can't change the legislation, they might be a good storyteller and be able to give you visibility that you don't have on your neighborhood platform.
Thank you, Francella, for your brief look into the government's role as far as the digital divide entails and, the first steps that we can really take to attain these reforms. Now we're going to transition over into the governmental aspect of this all, and we can start with Senator Savino. Hello, Senator Savino. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Brittany. And I want to thank Senator Sanders for hosting this event. And I've been following it from the beginning. It's fascinating listening to everyone. I'm very well familiar with the Citizens Commission for Children. I've done a lot of work with them over the years in my previous capacity in the Senate as chair of the Children and Families Committee, and in my previous career as a caseworker. So, it's not shocking to me to see the vulnerabilities that the digital divide has placed on children who are already at risk, whether they be in homeless shelters or they're living in poverty or they're they're at risk for placement or they're already in placement, and all of the challenges that we face. And the pandemic has certainly exacerbated that. We've seen everything that we knew about the digital divide, lack of access to broadband, people's inability to have connectivity, not having sufficient access to technology, schools being underfunded, all of those things were already there. The pandemic just shone a light on it in ways that we were not prepared for. We spoke about it earlier, I think, when we talked about what happened when we went to remote learning. The Department of Education provided what they thought was a solution. They came up with a program where they were going to identify the students who were most at need, purchasing or lending out. What they said was they were going to lend out 322,000 iPads that were LTE enabled, so that it came with a data plan, so you wouldn't have to have a pre-existing internet connectivity. They thought that they were going to solve this problem by creating a process by which parents could apply for it and request it. What they didn't understand is they didn't have a system that parents, teachers, and principals trusted. And if the people don't trust the system, they're not going to access it. If they don't access it, they don't have it. It's the equivalent of having nothing. They first decided to target homeless shelters. They were going to provide 13,000 students in homeless shelters with these services, not recognizing that DOE doesn't talk to DHS, which is the Department of Homeless Services. The Department of Homeless Services Most of their shelters are in very old buildings, many of them with, very thick walls. They didn't have access to broadband themselves. They're very hard to provide wireless connectivity there. And so you gave them iPads where they really couldn't connect anyway. So they didn't solve a problem. And here we are, months later, we're still struggling with this. So I think some of the proposals about how do we get our private sector partners to recognize that they have an obligation to the public sector? How does government create the possibility of possibly a public Wi-Fi? I know the city of New York provides free broadband, but it doesn't work everywhere. We have to close all of those gaps because the pandemic's not going away. But more importantly, one of the things the pandemic has done is it's shown that more people are going to begin to work remotely from home. More businesses are going to require their employees to work remotely for a longer period of time. More people are going to be accessing educational opportunities from home. And so we need to step up our game. But here's something I want to talk about, because my committee is really not focused on broadband accessibility or even technology in that perspective. That really would be the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. What I really focus on in the Internet and Technology Committee is one of the expanding threat of cybersecurity threats. We are seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it big and small. Local governments are struggling with what they call ransomware attacks. We're seeing it in our healthcare institutions, our school districts, where many small governments are being attacked, malware attacks, all sorts of cybersecurity risks that people just don't understand. And as we begin to find ways to close the digital divide for people who are already vulnerable, many of whom are living below the poverty line. I think Francella spoke about that briefly at the end of her presentation, and I want to follow up on that. We're going to be finding ways to connect many of these vulnerable people to access to technology so that they can get the services they need. They can become, they can further participate in our growing economy. They can access education. They can become, more computer literate. They are more vulnerable every day. So one of the things I believe we also have to focus on is finding ways to provide security education, making sure that we help people close that gap so that they don't, in an effort to expand their opportunities and their educational opportunities, they don't become victims of people who are lying in wait every day to take advantage of them. Cyber criminals are developing and boosting their attacks, at an alarming pace. They're exploiting the fear and the uncertainty caused by the unstable social and economic situation created by COVID-19. That's a quote from Jürgen Stock, who's the Interpol Secretary General. Every day, there are threats that are reworked to prey on COVID-19 vulnerabilities. Most of these threats have been pre-existing, but since COVID-19, the upsurge on a remote workforce and people using the internet for online shopping, grocery delivery, selling personal items, cyber, etc. Cyber criminals are amplifying their efforts, and they are incredibly sophisticated, and they are very successful. There's the old classic email and phone scams. We all remember when the internet first became in everyone's household. People started using email on a regular basis. We would all get those emails from, so-called foreign relatives who were leaving us millions of dollars. It seemed ridiculous. I never knew I had relatives in foreign countries who had, millions of dollars and were just looking for me, and most of us laugh it off. But the truth is a lot of people fall for them. Talk to the DA's office and they'll tell you about how many people are taken advantage of every day. Well, those old classic email and phone scams, they're just becoming more and more sophisticated. There's remote users as well as home users. They're now downloading new software with applications. People are receiving more phone calls on both their mobile and landlines, making them even more vulnerable to those classic old email and phone scams. We hear our constituents call and say that, someone called them saying that it was their granddaughter who was arrested and she was being held and she needed bail money. And the next thing their bank account has been raided. And you wonder, how does it happen? Well, it happens because people are willingly giving away their information. I think Francella talked about it briefly at the end of her presentation, where many times we are clicking on the end user agreement, I agree, sharing our data, not knowing who we're giving it to, not knowing what we're doing just because we want to get through that end user agreement so we can access that website, we can access that app, we can access that, games on the internet and Facebook are incredibly dangerous. We need to start to educate consumers, particularly vulnerable populations, seniors and young people, that when they are using the internet, wherever they are, when users, they should be wary. If someone asks them for their password, for their personal information or unique codes, they should be very concerned about that. Many times they'll claim to be verifying a transaction or some needed personal information to convince the intended victim to give them their details. Never we have to explain to people, you should never provide personal detail over the phone or via email. We have to teach people to be aware of malware and phishing. It's not very hard to get people to click on a link these days. You think about how many times you go on social media sites and Facebook and there's those, games or those quizzes, click here to see who you would have been as a Hollywood star. You have no idea what you're doing half the time. Put in your date of birth. You are giving away your information. You are creating vulnerability, and you are creating access to your personal information that could lead to all sorts of cybersecurity threats, and it could lead to financial ruin and identity theft. There's malicious websites and the payment apps. That's something I've noticed, and I'm going to work with Senator Sanders on this with the banking committee. Many people are at home now, and they have a lot of time on their hands, and they've decided that they want to either update their home or get rid of things, buy new furniture, sell furniture. Many of these websites where people are selling things, OfferUp or even Craigslist or eBay, a lot of times you'll be notified by someone who says, I want to purchase your item. Like, I use this app, Cash App or some other app. None of these apps are really highly regulated. It is not regulated by the banking industry. It is not regulated by, in New York State, the Department of Financial Services. They are highly suspect, and people should not utilize them, but it makes things very simple. And the next thing you know, you're trading your information with someone who raised your bank account, and there's no way for you to get your money back. We have to really raise awareness about some of these risks. So as we expand access to the internet and expand access for broadband and make sure that people have the technology they need so that they can fully participate in our economy and they can fully participate in new educational opportunities, we also have to be aware that they are also becoming very vulnerable in this new world. And we have to raise awareness and education about how they can protect themselves and they can protect their financial security, their credit, their reputation, and their family's reputation. And so I look forward to continuing the work with Senator Sanders. I see my colleague, Assemblyman Vanel, is here. And I was really fascinated to listen to Francella's presentation. I certainly look forward to speaking to her in the future about other ways that we can collaborate on making New York State more responsive to the needs of people and at the same time keeping us all safe. Thank you.
And with that, thank you, Senator Savino. I would like to introduce Clyde Vanel. I'll allow him, Assemblyman, to introduce himself and add him to the conversation.
Oh, well, thank you, Marvin. And it was great hearing Senator Savino talk about broadband and cybersecurity and making sure we are protected online. Just to talk about and highlight the digital divide, I did not have the Zoom information to get on here. So you guys prevented me from getting on here. You see some digital divide going on. But first of all, I have to, really tip my hat to Senator Sanders and the staff for putting this together to talk about the digital divide and talk about how we have to make sure that that our community in Southeast Queens and communities across the state have the proper access to data, to information. Now, keep in mind, I believe I got on a little later, but I heard the previous speaker speak about how the importance of access to broadband, where it is known as a fourth utility, right? We have water, we have gas, we have electricity, but now access to broadband, to high-speed broadband, is something that is fundamentally important. Now, coronavirus has not only shown that, exposed it, it has exacerbated it now. Now in a post-pandemic world, we see that we are moving towards an online first world. And forget about, now we could talk about, obviously we could talk with education, we could talk about employment, we could talk about a whole host of things. But even government, as we provide services, oftentimes now we're going to an online first world. So when we talk about closing the digital divide, yes, there's accessibility issues and there's usage issues. Accessibility includes whether or not you actually have broadband coming to your area, to your neighborhood, to your house, to your business. Still many areas in New York State do not have that. Still many areas in New York City do not have enough of that. Then we have not just having the broadband or the access of the internet coming to your area, the speeds. Are the quality, do we have enough speed that comes to your area? Then the cost, right? New York, it is one of the most expensive places to access data, right? So one gigabyte of data in other cities and other places around the world, sometimes 4 times less than the amount to be able to access it in New York State. So even if you have access, if your neighborhood, if your house, if your area has access to high speed, the cost is oftentimes prohibitive. We find also data. What's very important when we talk about information and finding out about the digital divide, we still have a want of data, right? The FCC came out with a report that said that I believe they said a certain amount of, I believe 21 million or something like that, Americans did not have enough broadband access or what have you. But the way they reported that was based on the internet service providers reporting based on blocks and not on households. So the number is much higher, but forget about the FCC. New York State, we have the governor has a broadband for all office. And I don't believe we properly measure our shortage of access to internet in minority areas and in rural areas. As a matter of fact, I have the senator and Senator Savino and I are going to be meeting this week with the governor's ESD to talk about broadband access to rural areas and to minority areas. So this is something that, number one, we have to make sure that the access is important, but also we have to make sure that we close the skills gap. I think Francella talked about even folks that have access to the internet may only have access on their mobile phone. That doesn't give you access to the full availability to properly work in and to be able to engage in the economic opportunities, to be able to file for jobs, to be able to even access government services. So we have to also make sure that we close that gap, and we continually look at digital divide meant something different 5 years ago than it means now. So that's also changing too. So we also have to make sure that we look at what does that mean, and how do we close it, and how do we make sure that people have full access to participate fully in the world. One small example, we cannot forget the elderly population, right? If we're talking about digital divide in other areas, the elderly, forget about it, right? So during coronavirus, yes, I'm the chair of Internet New Technologies in the Assembly. But in my position, one of the most proudest thing I did was in my house with my mother, who wants to make sure she goes and prays every Sunday. She couldn't do that during during the time we were on lockdown, I had to go to my mother's house and go on Zoom with my family so that she can connect with everyone, because she didn't know how to use that. So that's something that, just a prime example of how we need to be mindful that even our seniors can't even go to church if they don't have the proper internet access, the proper hardware, the proper connection to be able to connect with folks.
And I see we've been joined by Senator Sanders. You want to come in, give greetings, say a few words, and on this subject.
Greetings to all. If there ever was a more important subject at a more important time, we don't know of it. We knew that there was a digital divide, but it has become a rupture, a digital rupture with the COVID-19 lockdown. Everything from students who are unable to learn in school, especially those in the shelter system, and lo and behold, after 6 months of remote learning, we find out that the shelter system did not have Wi-Fi, so that there's no way they could have been participating at the shelter. We are in a world of pain. And just when the city and the state, for that matter, and indeed, let's say the nation, is talking about going back, that we're about to go through another lockdown, the COVID-19 winter, the winter of COVID. Winter is coming. Matter of fact, we might as well say winter is here. And that means whatever we didn't learn before, God willing, we have learned it so that we'll be more ready. I really am pleased that Assemblymember Vanel and State Senator Savino have stolen time away from their day so that they can share with you, the audience, of what they have learned in their heroic battles, these two, that they've been fighting to make sure that New York State is internet friendly, that we are at the next level. We're gonna have to do some new and different things, and we might as well do it in this district first. We might as well pick one district, just happens to be mine, and just focus and say, okay, in this place, let's make sure that we leave no one behind. So with that in mind, I think that I urge all of you to participate in this, especially if there's a question and answer session, and let's hear the wisdom that these folk, I caught some of the wisdom of Clyde Vanel, and he's so gifted in this. I must admit that every third word I understood. So with that in mind, I want to turn back, because I went and grabbed my dictionary now. So when the assembly member speaks, I'll be ready. Thank you very much. I look forward to working with you all. Thank you to the staff for putting this on, to Marvin Holland, who I believe that this was his idea, that we tackle it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator. I just have a question for both Assemblyman Vanel and Senator Savino. Is there anything the state is doing actively to close the digital divide, particularly with it looking like there's going to be another lockdown in the state?
Well, again, Marvin, first of all, good to see you, James. I think there's two issues that we have to deal with. One is continuing challenge of broadband access across, it's not just New York City. There are whole parts of upstate New York. You go into the Adirondacks, you go into parts of the North Country where they still don't have access to broadband. There are parts of the Hudson Valley where you have spotty access. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do. And part of that may be bringing the private sector providers to the table. There's longstanding history as to why certain companies have certain areas, why you can't, one of the, when you're an elected official, you'll have calls from constituents all the time who they'll see advertisements on TV for great internet packages, and they'll call you up and say, why can't I have that? Well, because that provider doesn't service your area. Well, why is that? Because there are agreements between the certain providers to provide service in different places, which is why I live in Staten Island. I can only get internet service from Spectrum, Charter Spectrum, whatever we call it nowadays, or from Verizon. I can't get it from Optimum Online. People who live in Brooklyn can't get Charter, Spectrum in the area that I represent. So those are conversations I think that have to be had with the various companies as to, does that system still work for people? Does it stymie competition? Is competition good? Are we bordering what's a monopoly? The government, we decide which providers provide service to public housing developments so that there's no competition there. So I think that's part of the conversation. There's the purchase, acquisition, and distribution of technology and equipment, making sure that equipment is accessible for people. As I said earlier in my presentation, the Department of Education, loaned out 321,000 iPads to people, but a lot of the process was very complicated, and so it didn't meet the intended goal. So we have to fix that. And then again, I continue to have real concerns about people's security because as we become more and more dependent on using the internet for everything, we're ordering everything online now. And so the idea of just pointing and clicking sounds really easy, but we place ourselves at tremendous risk every day just ordering a sandwich online without knowing what we're doing. So I think those are some of the things that we're going to have to do. Government can't do everything, but and by the way, the other thing government needs to do, and then I'll hand it off to Clyde, is we need to update our own systems. We saw what happened earlier this year when our unemployment system completely collapsed under the weight of the demand. One of the big problems for government is that everything we do with the purchase of equipment is done pursuant to our procurement laws that say it has to go to the lowest responsible bidder. Nobody in their right mind in the private sector would buy technology that way because it means it has to go to the cheapest. We have to reform our procurement laws too, so that we are able to purchase technology and software that is responsive to the demand of government so that we can respond when we have to. And right now we don't do that. So I think those are some of the challenges that we'll face as a government as we help people respond as well.
Thank you.
So Marvin, so a couple of things. First, remember in 2015, the governor started a new office called the New York State Broadband Program. And at that time, he put in $500 million to be able to address having what they call broadband for all. One of the things I said before was I'm weary and suspect of the reports that come out of the federal government, that come out of New York also, about what we report as saying how much penetration we have for broadband. And that's part of what we're gonna meet about to make sure to see where that process is going. At this point, since 2015, at least half of those funds have been rewarded for projects to be able to have broadband in rural areas outside of New York City. And again, we have to make sure that that's working and what's happening with that. I don't know how, I don't know where the program is so far just yet. But I do know that, talking to my colleagues in North Country, talking to my colleagues in Buffalo and Syracuse, they don't see it. Another thing that we're trying to do is I've introduced a bill to be able to see how, and as Senator Savino rightly pointed out, part of the issue of internet access is the affordability. When she only has one internet provider, and when I only have one internet provider in my area, what have you, right? The cost is very, is very prohibitive. One of the things that we want to do, one of the things I wanted to see was if we could have more internet service providers in New York State and more competition to lower the prices. I entered a bill, and we're going to review something called looking at what we call ATST 3.0, where the bandwidth from the television stations, right? They have extra bandwidth or what have you. Can we use some of that bandwidth for internet services? The governor is kind of doing something like that with a reverse auction for his broadband program, and this would probably supplement to that. But we may need more competition to be able to get data so that we can lower the prices so that more people can have access to the internet.
Thank you, Clyde. We've been joined by Robert Boulder and Savannah from Cornell, and I think Brother Mike is there as well. And they've been doing some research on the Senator's District, the 10th Senatorial District. And so one of the reasons we're doing this is the obvious reasons that everybody pointed out. But as the Senator said, we're really taking a close look at the 10th Senatorial District. So I would like for the students from Cornell and Robert to introduce themselves. They have a quick presentation that's addressing some of the concerns that have come out already, as we've already started doing some of that work on the ground. So I'll turn it over to Savannah and Mike and Robert to give us a quick presentation on the 10th Senatorial District.
Great. Just I'll quick make a fast introduction. We actually have a campus in Lower Manhattan. So these are students that are based with me here in New York City. And we've been working on a semester-long initiative in partnership with Senator Sanders' office to really look at a number of critical topics affecting the community. And Savannah Lim is here, and also Mike O'Kee are here to be able to give you, again, an overview on some of their preliminary research. We're going to continue to be working on this through December, and then looking at a number of new initiatives in the year ahead that will work on these topics. So this is, again, a preview of some of the things that we're working on, and we'll continue to be committed to this effort over the next year. Thank you, Savannah and Mike.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. We're in great company. We've been able to hear everyone's presentations, and we're really excited to be able to contribute. So I'm Mike O'Kee. I am a Master of Regional Planning student at Cornell.
And I'm Savannah Lim. I'm a senior in the Urban and Regional Studies Department. And it's been really great hearing from everyone about the issue. And we'll just kind of talk a little bit more about it and present our research and findings. And hopefully we'll be able to communicate and convey some ideas that could be helpful.
Yeah, so a bit of an agenda, and we will move quickly. We'll be respectful of everyone's time. Of course, we'll give an introduction to kind of our angle. So a lot of people have been so valuably sharing the real experiences of people of the Senate District and of New York. And that's so insightful for us to hear. Because of COVID, we're not able to go out and actually meet people. So what you're going to see here is a very top-down, analytical kind of analysis of the issue of the digital divide, and particularly Senate District number 10. So then we're going to frame that in a bit of a design framework. We're going to go into some of those disparities and a few case studies from around the country. Then we're going to talk about what the communities are doing, like so many people have here today. Then we're going to talk about the next steps in our research.
Yeah, so just briefly introducing the issue. We're all very familiar with the digital divide, but as we move into this hyper online oriented 21st century, especially in the era of COVID, the digital divide becomes much more prevalent and much more important during this time. So just a brief overview of statistics, right? 30% of Hispanic and Black New Yorkers lack internet access compared to 20% of white and 22% of Asian New Yorkers. And then 41% of New Yorkers without a high school degree lack a broadband internet connection, and 44% of New Yorkers in poverty lack broadband internet access. So this is clearly a very pressing issue, especially in Black and Brown communities.
Yeah, so these are some charts of those disparities that are coming straight out of the New York City Internet Master Plan, which we'll talk a lot about. So it was kind of commissioned by Mayor de Blasio. And you'll see, like I said, you'll see it come up a lot. It's a really, really great resource for kind of holding the city accountable for all the promises that it made and all the disparities that it's highlighted. So there was actually a huge push in January of this year, right before COVID kind of took off, with the office saying that they were going to do everything that they could to kind of close the digital divide. Of course, COVID kind of took their priorities over. But as we all know here, broadband and internet access is needed now more than ever because of COVID. And now it's a really good time to kind of hold the mayor's office to that promise. So this first graph, just the disparities between people who have laptop access and desktop access and people who have access to broadband for those devices. This next one breaks down these disparities by race as well as by age. And we'll also be happy to share this presentation with all of you. And then these final two break it down by employment and by education level. And so all across the board, you can see those disparities are very, very pronounced and prevalent.
Yeah, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Internet Master Plan. So in January of this year, the mayor announced that New York City was going to move forward with this plan, although like as we were saying, COVID has pretty much kind of halted this for a little bit, even though it's more crucial than ever right now to make it happen. So their plan is to kind of partner with private companies to bring affordable high-speed internet to all 5 boroughs. And this, as you can see through the diagram, will mostly be done through buildings and routers to reach users personally.
Yeah, so we start to map out these things to try to get a sense of the access within the district. And the first thing you'll notice that a lot of the infrastructure is in place, particularly because of JFK. A lot of the infrastructure to make sure that JFK runs its operation smoothly. There's also a lot of the infrastructure that's needed just to provide broadband. So this is just the electricity transmission cables. You see that they go through and near the district more so than any other borough, that lower part of Queens. So these are the Link NYC kiosks that fall within the district. So if you all are familiar with them, there's a picture of one up there. It's this kiosk. It serves 2 purposes. It both charges your mobile device, and it also serves as a Wi-Fi router. And then Link NYC is also the broadband network that these kiosks operate off of. And so the next map here actually shows their distribution all over New York City, and you see that there's a glaring omission of kind of where they decided to place them. There's a very strong link between strong commercial areas and very affluent areas. Kind of the areas that already have the most access are the ones where Link NYC is placing their kiosks. And conversely, the places that have the least broadband is where Link NYC has yet to place their kiosks. So just another picture of them. And then a new initiative, pretty much propelled by Verizon, but a lot of telecommunication companies, is to convert these old phone booths into Wi-Fi hotspots as well, which is definitely something that we'll examine for its viability within the Senate district. And then finally, this is something that's been touched on, and we're really glad that we got to dive into this as well, that homeless shelter component of it. It's already a very multifaceted, very complex issue, and when you throw in the lack of access for students that are homeless at the moment, you see that there's also a disparity in where broadband access and broadband coverage are, and where these students that are in homeless shelters across the city are.
Yeah, so next we'll talk a little bit about how we frame the issue and really approach the problem. So we're both kind of like designers and urban planners, so we kind of looked at this from a design framework. So the 4 ways we broke it down were through mobility, education, healthcare, and of course the individual.
Yeah, so this is kind of a representation. One thing that you realize is that there's not necessarily a hierarchy, but that it's very interconnected. When you have internet access, you also have internet access to mobility. You're able to call an Uber or a Lyft if you aren't able to use public transportation if you're not comfortable doing so. You're able to teleconference with your doctor at your clinic. You're able to do schoolwork and help your child do schoolwork. All of these things are so interconnected, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we dive into the literature that we dove into. But the biggest thing is that this access isn't equal. So even if you have access to it, if it's not very strong, then you effectively, by having less strong broadband, have less access to your doctor, to mobility, to education. Yeah, and then this is teasing out. So we went through about 18 different reports from both 2019 and 2020. So the big thing in 2019 was kind of delving into the climate aspect of it. Of course, New York City was devastated by Hurricane Sandy, and we see that a lot of disparity was prevalent around that and around the access to people getting emergency services. So that's what the work in 2019 centered around. And 2020, of course, centers around COVID-19 and that impact. So we combed through about 19 different reports. We synthesized that information. We'd be happy to share it with you. But the primary takeaway is that there is a direct link, a direct correlation between the access that you have to internet and how likely you are not only to just not contract COVID-19, but to not pass away from COVID-19. So very, very provocative, but their methodology all checks out. It is a life or death matter for you to have internet access.
Yeah, and then we also looked at some case studies across the United States in big cities like Houston, as well as Seattle. And so, for example, in Houston, the school district started giving laptops to every single student, as well as providing digital learning centers where students could go in and use computers and use Wi-Fi. And when people found that this wasn't enough or they couldn't commute to the sites, these churches also started filling the gaps. So we kind of see a lot of community organizations stepping up and filling in the gaps where the government or the school district could not. Similarly, in Seattle, they've been actually trying to close the digital divide since 1996. It's 2020, so it's obviously a huge issue, a big problem. And they've also been trying to create this digital equity action plan that works with community leaders, nonprofit organizations, et cetera, to really close the divide in Seattle, which is shockingly big considering how much of a tech hub it is. I would say New York City is also pretty similar in that it's one of the big tech hubs as well. And what we kind of realized from all our research is that all cities are struggling with this issue. Every city is trying to close the digital divide, but is really having a hard time doing so. And we're finding that a lot of the community is really stepping in. So for example, I know that in Queens, during the pandemic, they gave out free iPads or tablets that served as hotspot routers for anyone who has a child in the public school system. And they also had free programs that help users to use these computers, tablets, and laptops. So we kind of realized that there are 4 basic steps communities and cities can take to close the divide. So the first, obviously, is to determine the need of the community. And this is really where working with community leaders, local youth, local organizers comes in, and really finding out where the problem is and where it exists. The second is to obtain and distribute electronic devices. A lot of school districts are doing this across the country where they're trying to provide students with either iPads or laptops to use at home and serve as hotspots. The third is pretty self-explanatory, provide internet. And the last one, obviously, is to train and empower new users, because it would be irresponsible just to let users figure out their devices on their own.
Yeah, so just wrapping it up here, the 3 biggest things that we want to take away is to make sure these goals are quantifiable. If we all walk away with anything from this town hall that we're having here, probably that this is a very multifaceted, very complex issue that we often prescribe the federal government, both the state government to kind of take over when the effects are hyper-local, the effects are individual, the effects are our families and our friends. So the best thing is to make sure that we are able to quantify that process so that we can know if we are making progress, we can know definitively that we are closing the digital divide. The next thing ties right into that. Local context is key. There's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach. Just like we were talking about how different places have different providers, you can't come in and kind of do this one-size-fits-all approach when just the technical capabilities of these networks varies from place to place. And then finally, is making sure that probably your best remedy to that last issue is that you need to invest in municipal-owned broadband as a public utility. We see this in Red Hook. We've seen it in a lot of communities that, like we said earlier, or like what was said earlier, it is very much an infrastructural piece. It is very much a right in 2020 to have access to these issues. We know how intricately it is tied to health and well-being. Once we start funding it as such, then we're a lot more likely to close that digital divide.
And our next steps.
Yeah, so just moving forward, and we would love any feedback. We want to make sure that this document is as useful for all the community members and all the legislators we have here as possible. So we want to conduct some interviews. We want to make sure that we're gearing our research towards the users. We want to actually go so far as to propose the best places for Link NYC kiosks within the district. We want to add that COVID-19 component and connect it to telehealth. And then we're gonna wrap that up in a final proposal that we'd be happy to distribute to everyone.
So we've been gathering a lot of data from New York City, the New York City Comptroller's Office, American Community Survey, census data, and it would have been great to get some data as well from the New York City Department of Technology.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is an issue we're very passionate about, and we would love to hear from other people as well. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you really want to voice in this, like please reach out to us through the emails provided here.
All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. I would like to see if either Senator Savino or Assemblyman Bunnell have any questions for the students. And I would also like to see if the students have any questions for the respective committee chairs on internet and technology. And also I would like to add, was in doing your research, was there anything that surprised the students? What was the biggest surprise you saw? And then like to open this up to a dialogue with the legislators.
Yes, I can tackle that question surrounding the biggest surprise. I think statewide for New York State, it's not a rule, but there is very much a trend of a correlation between how much income a municipality has and how much access to broadband, as well as how many people are there. So that kind of holds true around the state, with the exception of Queens and Bronx. They are dense. They do have people that have high wealth levels, and yet they have some of the lowest access to broadband in the state. It just kind of breaks the rule for the entire state. And so that's one thing that we want to get to the bottom of. We want to figure out why are places that have much lower populations, much lower density all across the state, why are places like Syracuse having better internet access than places like Queens and Bronx? Of course, we want everyone to have the most internet access, but in the meantime, we need to make sure that the most people in the places that are most densely populated have access to it, and we want to figure out why that doesn't seem to be the case yet.
Yeah, and Mike, if I could add on to that, I'm also particularly surprised that given the scale and the sophistication and the global presence of JFK International Airport, that is not an epicenter of that technology, given the numbers of millions of people that are flying through. You would actually think that would be the kind of epicenter for this technology to then be of great benefit to the broader community. And that seems to be just an entire void, and that another question that we certainly want to explore.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, did you guys get a chance to compare the cost of data services between the states to see if New York was paying an inordinate amount to be able to be connected and have service?
No, we haven't, and that's a really great suggestion. So we did want to just do a very simple level consumer analysis of people in Queens versus people in Brooklyn versus people in Manhattan. Who are their service providers? What is their introductory rate? What is that rate after 1 year? Just to see if people were being offered these prices at a fair rate. We hadn't thought about comparing it to other states, and that's a really good next step. So thank you.
And I wonder, do you think that we have, so one of the things that, I'm trying to wrap my head around is, right, the cost of these services for folks that are in New York State, but also the quality of service, right? So, and we're still looking at studies, but it looks like we're paying more for much less, much less quality, right? For much and for much less data. So it's interesting to talk about, to see how, if we could do some kind of utility for internet. How would that work? Has that worked in other places on a larger scale? To make, have internet become like a utility where we buy it, where the city or the state buys it from wherever, and then we provide it. Like have some kind of, I don't know, as you guys say, some kind of Con Edison version that we have for the internet. What did that do to the other ISPs? Did it work out? Is it something that was a good thing to do?
Yeah, so I would venture to say that it has been successful in the places it's been implemented, but all of those have been communities much, much, much smaller than an entire borough. And so it's a scaling issue and making sure a lot of that quality isn't lost when you scale it up.
What about in other places? Other countries have went another direction. I think Japan, I think Luxembourg, and other places where they have a lot of competition for internet service providers, right? So they don't have it as a utility. It's just easier for companies to become internet service providers, and they compete. What about if New York does something like that, to say, because right now what we have is we allow almost a monopoly of a few internet service providers per area. What about just going the other direction? It's not having utility, saying that we should provide just competition and open up the market. What about that?
Once again, I'm just venturing here, but I think that there are new players trying to enter the space. The issue is that they, when you're any kind of small business, you want to be successful right away. And the best business model for doing that is to go to the most affluent areas. So there are new players trying to enter the game. They kind of centralize in places that are most affluent, where people have that mobility to be able to hop into a new service provider. Their lives aren't very dependent on that not working out. They have that accessibility to hop back to their old provider if it doesn't work out. We're not seeing these same kind of new companies trying to fill in the gaps where there aren't broadband. They're often hopping into places where there are already established systems. So, there's nothing necessarily barring more competition, but that competition isn't being used as a tool to add broadband to places where there isn't.
Thank you. Do either one of the senators have a question for the students from Cornell? And my apologies to the students. Anytime Clyde Vanell's around, the assemblyman, you're going to get more work because he really knows this stuff.
Incredibly helpful. We're very grateful for this question.
So, all right, one more. So then, but just now, there's the accessibility of getting broadband to the community. But just as far as having just the end user cost for data plans, right? So, right now in New York, right now in the 10th senatorial district, right now in my little district, an average data plan, for basic data plan is probably $100. Basic, I mean, just bone basic. And I wonder, if we allowed, if we allowed more, and I've seen now that, the cable companies now are doing also telephone services, and these telecoms are doing more stuff or what have you. But I wonder if the market is open more, if that $99 could be halved, and then that could be halved. I wonder if just the actual, not just access on the ground of whether you can get, service, but assuming that there's services that come to the 10th senatorial district, how do we address the cost of a data plan and to make that price lower?
Yeah, that's a question for us to tackle. We haven't done a lot of work on that policy side of it. We're actually not sure kind of the parameters for regulating that actual cost, because data doesn't have borders. So how do you kind of regulate that? For me, I'm a student. I'm originally from North Carolina. I'm on a data plan that was initiated in North Carolina. Of course, it's serving me well here in New York. Can we regulate the price of that when broadband and data doesn't have borders? So that's definitely something, a phenomenal question, something we have to look into, just the parameters of these borders and how those are legislated.
Yeah, when I'm looking at it in New York, which doesn't make sense to me, right? So a gigabyte's a gigabyte. This megabits, bits, and all this stuff is this. Why does it cost 20 times more in America, in New York, to transfer this data than it does for me if I'm in India or if I'm in this other place, right? Why is these costs? And again, this is not to you guys. It's a rhetorical question, but it should not cost that much money for New Yorkers to be able to go to transmit information, to collect information, to be able to go to school, to be able to interact, to be able to do this Zoom thing that I'm doing right now. It should not be this cost. It should not be this expensive. And when we make that hurdle, we make it so expensive, that is a major hurdle to the digital divide. And that's something that, that the senators and I really have to address. But I have to give kudos to you guys about your presentation on seeing all of the, connecting the dots for what's happening with the 10th senatorial district. But New York statewide, we have to really address the cost of accessing this data.
Yeah, I actually have a question.
And I see I seen the J Roach there from Spectrum. Yes, my Spectrum bill is too high.
So, Chairman, I guess, Vanel, I have a question. So as the chair of the subcommittee on Internet and New Technologies, what is the one thing that you are prioritizing in this pandemic?
So, this, first of all, this whole presentation is great, and there's no but. So we have to really make sure that people have access and usage, right? Access to the roads, meaning access to the internet, access to information, and how to engage. What does that mean? That means, one, certain places have to have, certain communities, certain homes do not actually have internet access. Period. They cannot get connected. They don't have the lines so that's something that is not as much of a problem it's not a problem in the 10th senatorial district. It's not much of a problem in New York City, big problem in rural areas. So we have to really make sure we have to close that gap in all over New York State. It doesn't make sense where there are communities right now, today in 2020, where in the neighborhood, for the kids to go to distance learning, they have to drive somewhere to be able to connect to the internet. That's happening in 2020. If you're not sure about that, drive out of New York City, drive to upstate, and you'll find that. So that's something that we have to deal with and connect. We have to also deal with one thing I talked about. Look, okay, in the 10th senatorial district, we don't have that issue. We have the issue of access, of being able to afford internet and quality and speeds. We have a speed problem and we have affordability. So even if the speeds suck, right? If you don't have $100 a month to be able to be connected, then that's a problem. If you have $100 a month to be connected, if you have 3 brothers or sisters, right, that are all using the internet at the same time, guess what? Somebody's going to be closed down or shut down. You don't have enough speeds, or you don't have enough capacity at home to be able to have the upgraded account. So the cost is very prohibitive and expensive. So how do we make sure we deal with that situation where we have that, or we have people that we have situations where there's a data plan, a limited amount of gigs to be able to engage, right? Mom or dad needs to be able to use that for work, but the kids need to be able to use that for school. So we got to send the kids to the library to be able to use. So cost is a big deal, right? Cost is a major deal that we have to address. That's an issue. Another major issue is usage. There's a skill gap. Even when we talk about young people, right? We talk about the older people that don't know how to use the internet, and we say young people are very connected or what have you. But we have we have younger folks that know how to social media. They know how to entertain on on these platforms, but they don't know how to properly engage for work. They don't know how to properly engage for the new economy. We have to close that skills gap to make sure that, and then we have people that are, as you said in your report, even if I have access on my mobile phone, we have many people that don't have access on a laptop or a device to be able to and if they don't have that kind of access, or they don't engage that way, they'll be less likely to apply for a job online, less likely to do virtual working online, less likely to do certain kind of things. So we have to be able to address all of those things, and all of those things are different. Another major issue is what we call digital divide has been morphing over time. Digital divide used to be, a couple of years ago, used to be you need a email address. Now it's much more than that. So we have to be mindful of that and how it moves, and it's a moving target. So it's, it's a lot.
So with that, I'm going to bring Naji into the conversation. She's going to give us all the problems we discussed all morning long. But no, seriously, Naji from Spectrum wants to tell us what Spectrum's doing to help us with this digital divide.
Good morning, Holland. Good morning, Assemblymember Bernal. I see Ms. Senator Savino, Mr. Balder, and our Cornell friends. Greetings. Thank you for that very helpful presentation, by the way. I don't know if you saw me, I was taking my notes so I can go back to our team with some of the things here that are part of this conversation that we've been having for a very, very long time. Your keynote speaker, Marvin, was excellent, and the presentation she gave was wonderful. And one of the few things that I wanted to make sure that I highlighted for our participation in this conversation is that the digital divide, we talk about it like this sort of amorphous thing off in the woods, and it's not. It's a very real construct, and it has several principles that are a part of that. And I want to mention those principles because they really are a good segue for how Charter Spectrum has been working to assist in this issue. So number one, we have a franchise from New York City, and we provide service in our footprint in New York City. Just for those of you who may not be familiar, we're in Manhattan, Queens, and Staten Island, and we service the westernmost portions of Brooklyn from Williamsburg wrapping around to Bay Ridge. So there are areas of the city, contrary to popular belief, that our services are not available. And I want to also start by saying that, the pandemic, it all happened very quickly. It feels like it's been 10 years, but it really hasn't been that long. One of the things that Charter did very early on March 16th, the FCC asked ISPs and telecoms to take the Keep Americans Connected pledge, which essentially sheltered all of our existing customers and any folks in our area who had not previously been able to prioritize home broadband internet access. We sheltered them and made sure that they remained connected, and any folks who incurred any kind of financial hardships because of the unexpected challenges brought by the pandemic, we made sure that those folks were not disconnected, that they stayed attached so that they could work remotely, learn remotely, and stay in contact with friends and loved ones remotely. So a lot of our efforts to support our customers throughout the pandemic, because of how our franchise agreements with the City of New York are structured, most of our efforts have been to make sure that as many people in our footprint were connected, because obviously, as we've all said here before today, that internet access became a core piece of folks' ability to stay safe and stay connected. We have been investing in closing the digital divide long before the pandemic, and I did want to highlight some of those services, some of those programs, and some of the partnerships that have made that investment possible. back in 2017, we started offering what's called Spectrum Internet Assist, and recognizing that cost is one of the most significant barriers to folks in getting connected to the internet. Has made that investment possible. Back in 2017, we started offering what's called Spectrum Internet Assist, and recognizing that cost is one of the most significant barriers to folks in getting connected to the internet. I'm sorry, Marvin, are you hearing that delay in the feedback?
Yes.
Okay. You guys are gonna have to help me out here. I'm not sure how to.
I think it's okay now.
Okay. I think it's okay now. All right. So like I was saying, we started offering a low-cost broadband product. It's Spectrum Internet Assist, and it's $15 a month. And one of the things that we found out folks, didn't know early on was that every student household in New York City, by definition of the National School Lunch Program's community eligibility provision, every household in New York City that has a New York City public school student is available to get that Spectrum Internet Assist program for $15 a month. And so that addresses one of the issues that we know is key, which is cost. The other piece of this, which Assemblymember Vanel mentioned, and I'm really appreciative that he did, is skill. Having a digital device, whether it's a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, having these devices in your home and in your reach is not the sum total of the issue. If you don't know to use those devices and how to connect to the digital world, you're armed with tools but without the skill set. So Charter Spectrum has had long-standing community partnerships with folks like public libraries, boys and girls clubs, houses of worship. We work with a number of other kinds of not-for-profits, Lower East Side Girls Club, the Hispanic Federation, the National Action Network, to name a few. And through these organizations and their strong brand in the communities, we've been able to make targeted investments that allow people in the community across the age spectrum, across the economic spectrum, no pun intended, to come in and get training how to use the internet, how to use a tablet, how to use a computer. My mom is a good example, right? She came here from the Caribbean and has been here for over 40 years. A few years ago, I went to her house and she went and bought this big, shiny Apple computer. And I remember thinking, oh, this is amazing. My mother is now connected. No, every weekend and every other day, my mother was calling me simple things like, how do I turn this on? The folks at Apple, God love them, they were excited to have a senior come in. She's a customer. They gave her great customer service and sold her a computer. And once that computer came home, got out of the box and got plugged in, she had to go through a whole education curve on how to use that device. And so that's one of the things that we as Charter have long recognized and that we continue to prioritize, which is making sure that folks not only have access to the devices that they need, the infrastructure, which is the broadband and the Wi-Fi, but also the digital literacy to be able to use all of those tools in tandem to stay connected to the 21st century world. More specific on our pandemic response, of course, because of our franchises, there is only so much that we can do, and we have done everything that we can in our footprint to make sure that current customers are supported. We have stepped up our outreach to make sure that even though we're now in this virtual space, senior centers, residents that live in New York City Housing Authority, we know that these are vulnerable populations. And throughout this time, we have been in discussions with City Hall on how we can provide more permanent, long-standing solutions under the terms of our franchise agreement, and also just recognizing that cost is a very real barrier to folks. And so I know the folks at Cornell mentioned that, and Senator Savino, that procurement is a big part of this. Whenever there's a public-private investment, that is the route that has to be taken. And so did want folks to be aware that we are at the table, and we have made ourselves available because we know that it's going to take an all-hands-on-deck approach to get folks through this time, at least for as long as the pandemic is here. I will give your office, Marvin, some helpful tools that I hope you can share with your constituents and with any other folks that come across your path for how they can find out if they're in our service area and can get connected to Spectrum Internet Assist. And also, I'll share one other item with you that I think will be helpful for your folks to know about, which is a program that Charter Spectrum created just for this remote learning challenge that we are seeing. It's called Stay Connected. And what it is a product that school districts or individual schools, whether they're a charter, whomever, can directly procure access for their students and for their educators they would be the account holder. And so that kind of takes the burden off of the individual student households who may be cost restricted or face other hurdles to getting access. I'll share both of those items with your office, and please do feel free to disseminate those. And if anyone has any questions on those items or any of the other efforts that we've made before the pandemic, now during the pandemic, and looking forward to the days ahead, I'll be happy to answer any of those questions.
Thank you so much, Naji. I have the first question. The partnerships you have with various community partners, with churches, etc. How would we go about doing that in Southeast Queens? And do you have any partnerships in Southeast Queens?
We actually just recently, we are members of the Queens Chamber. And so through that partnership, we've been trying to lean on that relationship to get in touch more with sort of the incubators that are working in that space, whether they are, 1 and 2 person, businesses or cooperatives, whoever they are, so that we can connect with them and find out what those needs are. We have learning labs that we have 40 of them now in New York City, and a cluster of them in Queens. I can send you a list of where those are. We have some in charter schools. We have some in, like I said, houses of worship. And what these are basically digital labs that we build in these spaces, and where any member of the community can go. If it's a public library, obviously, if you have a library card, you can walk in, and there is a Spectrum learning lab there where you can go in, use a workstation, you can get hands-on training on how to access the internet and how to navigate that digital space. So like I said, we opened 2 most recently this past summer, and one of them at Merrick Academy in Queens. We've worked with a number of other schools for this venture, and like I said, I'll be happy to send you a list of the ones that we have in the Queens area. Of course, because of the pandemic, some of that in-person benefit has gone away, but some of our Learning Lab partners are looking at and have started looking at how they can do or use virtual platforms like this to continue that very important training that they were providing to seniors and students and whoever else needs it.
Thank you. Does anyone else? Naji.
I was going to add how Marvin, if there are organizations, Queens is that's my footprint. I grew up in Brooklyn, but I represent Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx for charter. If there are organizations that you would like us to connect with, just so that we can stay in contact with them and share the resources that the company has available, we do provide grants as funding becomes available, and those are sort of on an as announced basis. Just recently, we partnered with the National Action Network for a multi-year $10 million investment to support small, businesses, women and minority-owned businesses. So things like that are investments and great ideas that we would like to be able to share with the community and make sure folks are aware of. So I'm happy to set some time with you to talk about organizations that might be, willing and happy to hear about those availabilities.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions for Naji? It's on the line.
Hi, this is Randy Clickwin. Just a quick one. You had mentioned post-COVID in passing. Can you speak more about that? I think once we get everything going, everybody's now comfortable and happy, and then things change. How is that going to affect all of these customers, students, parents, et cetera?
Well, right now, hi, Randy, thank you for your question. Right now, like everyone else, we've sort of been in a reactive space. We are keeping a close eye on, what our regulators are doing and what the government is doing, state, local, and federal. And we have tried to keep a pulse on what our customers need. We have had our customer service folks available for the duration. You can call in and get that support. That's really our in to knowing what challenges people are facing. Sometimes they're financial, and sometimes through talking to our partners in the not-for-profit space and our government partners, our electeds and stakeholders, et cetera. That's how we have been able to have some idea of what the challenges are that people are facing beyond this. So when we say things like, post, I want to say post-pandemic, but I actually don't know if that's the right phrasing. Looking ahead, we know that some of the support structures that have been put in place to help people get through this time, once the emergency is gone, those needs aren't necessarily going away. Broadband access is not a pandemic specific need. It's a life need. It's a necessity. And so when we say post-pandemic, or when I say post-pandemic, what I'm really referring to is what investments can be made that after the imminent threat is gone, after the imminent danger is gone, as folks get back to the new normal, will they have the tools and resources that they need to stay connected to the internet? Charter is fully built out in New York City, and by that I mean every corner of our footprint where we are required to provide service, the infrastructure is there. Maybe what's not there in every household are the devices that folks might need. Maybe what's not there is the digital literacy. Like I said, our partnerships and investments have been longstanding before the pandemic, and it's always the company's goal to make sure that we remain good partners looking beyond that. So we will continue to get to know the community organizations that are working in our space. We'll continue to keep an eye on our customers and what their needs are so that we're not just reactive, but we're reacting with solutions that are actually helpful to folks.
And that's great to know. I'd like to ask if you could also keep in mind the financial aspect. That is also very likely not to change very quickly or at all. And having the price now increase because post-emergency is over could then just exacerbate the situation. So yes, now I have the training and the device, but I can't afford to maintain the connectivity.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions for Naji?
I do. Hi, good afternoon. This is Leona.
Hi, Leona.
Hi, I'm a New York City educator. So it was very promising to hear what Spectrum is doing. I do have a question about your Stay Connected program. Is that for New York City Department of Education school districts or like out New York State districts? Because I haven't heard any city parents mention that they were able to be a part of this program.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if there are any limitations in how the procurement piece of this goes. What I am going to do, if I knew how to use this app better, I would be able to attach the sheet there. There is a special group of folks that are available at the number and the email address that are on that Stay Connected note that explain who they are able to work with. And obviously there sometimes are restrictions on who can act, what's the word I'm looking for? Districts. I know that some of our upstate New York partners have been trying to work on this. I know that a few New York City charter schools that we've partnered with over the years have been able to do this.
Exactly. So like the charters I know have a different access than our city students. So I'm curious to see how maybe that connection or bridge can happen, which alludes to
I'm happy to share that with you. Can you send me a note with your email address and then I can send you both the documents?
Sure.
That's perfect. And then I can send it to you directly.
That'll be awesome, because my other question going again to about New York State and where you guys service, I wanted to know because of the pandemic and the need and the demand to close this digital divide, if Spectrum has increased their coverage map, like has it broadened, has it spread out?
That goes to that question sort of saddles a fence between what is our regulatory space. Like I mentioned earlier on, our franchise in New York City delineates where we serve. Our other telecom partners, Verizon, Altice, and other small providers in other parts of the state, even though the digital divide is a national issue and a statewide issue, we at Charter are very much defined by where our service footprint is. We have franchises with local franchise authorities. Like I said, for New York City, Do It, you can actually see our franchise agreements with Do It on their website. And that carves out, there, like I said, the Brooklyn, I'm going to call it the donut of Brooklyn. So we aren't in the center there, but we are in that outer perimeter. Yes, we're in that outer perimeter, and there are other and that does not mean that we don't work with organizations in these areas. For example, we did a back to school backpack drive. It's something that we do every year. And while we don't service while we don't have a franchise to service the Bronx, we have very, very close relationships with our elected partners and community stakeholders in the Bronx. We fund food donations, we do backpack giveaways, and these are in areas that are in our service footprint, and also just part of being a good partner. We have made those relationships in even the communities that we don't service to make sure that folks there are aware of the importance of digital literacy, aware of things and steps that they can take, even against education divides and even across economic divides, to make sure that they are aware of the importance of these tools and that they, we point them in the right direction for where they can go to improve their understanding and also their access.
Thank you. I have tons of questions, so I'm going to email you regarding broadband and all that, but I don't want to take from those others that are waiting. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions, Lena.
I would like to bring a couple other people into the conversation. We're going to use this last hour or so we have to kind of open up. We have a lot of community leaders who are now have joined us. One of the reasons we're doing this, we want to move beyond just having conversation and really start coming up with some of the solutions to the problem. And so with that, I would like to bring the Arts Business Collaborative into the conversation, as well as Brother Lindo from York College. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be invited to this forum. If you want to, I can start by telling you what York College is doing to make sure that we bridge this the technology divide that we find in our community. And after I'll be more than happy to answer any question that you may have. We have from the beginning of the pandemic, and this goes back to semesters and years ago, and Naja mentioned it before. This divide is not due to the pandemic. The pandemic became a catalyst for us to realize what are the pain that our community is feeling, and how we realize that there is a big gap, and I bring it a direct connection to civil liberties, and I believe that the fact that we don't have affordable, traditionally affordable internet connection, and I know that our partners with Spectrum are doing a great job to bring affordable prices, have created a big gap in learning, because we all say it is on the internet is available, yes, but when you have to pay $150 for a bill to connect to an internet, it's not right, it's not fair. Since the beginning of when the academic year started very well, and the pandemic hit us, what we decided to do in the leadership of President Eames and the rest of the cabinet was to orientate all our resources to those students that immediately were in the need for graduating that semester. And I'm very satisfied to say that within less than a week, we were able to satisfy their technology need. Immediately after, we opened the gates to every single student who needed a device. And we're talking about that we distributed over, if I may look at my numbers, over 780 devices so far. And this includes technology for faculty as well, believe it or not. We found many cases where faculties that are traditionally teaching on a blackboard and never use technology to collect assignments, and we have to bring them to the new way of teaching. So it was the gap in technology and learning didn't just happen with the student; it happens with a few faculty. We also realized that there was an issue with connectivity, and we partnered with our wireless carriers, and we purchased hotspots. and we distributed hotspots to students, and we're still doing it. Only this semester, we distributed over 75 hotspots, and approximately for the total of the year, it has been over 180 hotspots that have been distributed to all students who need it. We realized that we are not in the position to ask the students details. If you need it, if you ask for it, it's because you need it, and we are in a good position to distribute those devices. One of the elements that we found also, and it's very consistent with what Nasha mentioned before, is that now you have the device, now you have the technology. How do you use it? And we took advantage of courses, digital courses that we had available in our library, and we made them available to the students and the general population. And we partner with Microsoft and Apple to make sure that those courses that they have, those libraries that they have available, we could bring them to everybody's home. The majority of our students, they live in Jamaica, they live in Queens, and our focus has been to make sure that those students are served, to the point that we had a percentage of devices that we didn't ask the students to come and pick them up. Most devices were shipped to their homes. And in some cases, the devices were hand delivered by an IT staff. We have that situation with UPS. UPS, I don't know if you know that, but UPS doesn't deliver to apartment buildings. They don't want to leave valuables at a hallway, and they will not deliver it. So we have our staff member deliver, and in some cases I serve as an escort. So we have always one person delivering, one person outside, just to make sure that that person was safe. I have tons of information that I can give you in terms of what we have done to serve our students, but I want to make sure that I allowed for questions if you have any at this point.
I have a question. How can we expand, and thank you, I know you got on short notice. I really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. How could we expand the great work that you're doing at York into the community beyond just York College and the students? Is there a way we can expand that work into the community of Southeast Queens?
I think I believe that there are many ways that we can address that. There are our resources and libraries are there and can be made available to the total population. We have again, those trainings are recorded and they're available to currently to our faculty and staff with authentication, but it can be open to the community. And if you think about this, when we distribute a hotspot to a student, we are distributing internet access to a household. We realize that we are having 3 or 4 people connecting to that hotspot. So we are very satisfied with the fact that that is taking place, and we are actually looking for new ways to expand those partnerships. I'm open to any proposals that you or this group may have. I will be more than happy to partner beyond with Spectrum and any other private or public entity, so we can bring more benefits to our community. That's what we are here for.
Thank you.
Right. Before I finish with this brief presentation that I wanted to give you. I wanted to also mention how our students have been active participants in their engagement with their community. With our professional programs like nursing and OT, we have students that come from different boroughs, and those students, they serve in different hospitals within Queens and in the New York area. So we have made sure that, for instance, that those courses that require an accreditation, for example, nursing. So those students, they get to move forward to finalize their practice out of the campus. They have access to the campus. So our campus currently is not able to receive the totality of our students, but those specific programs that require, again, accreditation, we make sure to open the doors to our students in a safety manner. I'm actually the reopening coordinator for the campus for COVID-19, and we have a very tight and safe environment for our students. And those students, then they go to emergency rooms, they go to nursing homes, they go to all different health facilities to serve the rest of the community. So I believe that is another way that we're helping the community.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Arts Business Collaborative, would you like to chime in on what you do and how the community could work more closely with you to work on closing the digital divide?
Absolutely. I'm happy to start, and I can definitely talk about what we're doing on the programming side, and then I'm really excited to kick it over to Carolyn in terms of what we're doing on the research side, because we've got a lot of fascinating stuff going on. My name is Sami Nuriunis Figaredo. I am the Director of Programs at Arts Business Collaborative. Established in 2016, we are a 501c3 technical assistance organization dedicated to improving quality of life for people of color in the arts and STEM. We've noticed that there is a significant, especially as it pertains to the philanthropic sector, leadership gap among people of color in nonprofits, which is due to any number of things, whether it is lack of role models, lack of social capital and networks, the lack of relationships with funding sources. There are a lot of barriers to advancement for people of color in a number of fields, but especially, with what we really specialize in, which is sort of arts-based nonprofits, that is exceptionally true. Ultimately, people of color who are intrinsically well equipped to innovate and lead, especially when we are members of the communities that we serve, end up working for organizations or businesses that don't authentically represent us, withhold access to networks, capital, or advancement, or are operating or developing programs and services under biased assumptions, kind of without the input of the community or all of the above. So at Arts Business Collaborative, as Director of Programs, we offer a combination of technical assistance, entrepreneurship support, research, as Carolyn will soon share, community organizing, and fiscal sponsorship to address the barriers to facing communities, small businesses, and artists of color. Within our programming, our overarching sort of umbrella term for our programs is called the Grassroots Action Project, or GAP. The GAP ensures that nonprofits and social enterprises that are primarily led by people of color, primarily serving people of color, and operating with a budget of less than $2 million receive subsidized access to our consulting services. This also includes our fiscal sponsorship program, which currently hosts 9 fiscally sponsored organizations. Through that, we're able to support independent artists, community-minded small businesses, and unincorporated community groups with training, space, knowledge and skill shares, introductions to funders. Our programming in this way is geared to stand in the knowledge, skills, and funding gap between communities and artists of color, and their cultural institutions and the larger economic and social landscape. Within the last year or so, in terms of the digital divide, I think that there are some ways in which we were more fortunate than most in that our services can be performed remotely. So we have been operating for the large part, while we did have an office space, we are also able to work from home, providing, we have internet access. So one of the things that we really had to do sort of at the beginning of the pandemic was make sure that each employee had, whether it's a hotspot or like solid, stable internet connection, to be able to continue to provide quality services even from their own home. Where we're starting to see, an issue is that that is not the case for our clients and for the communities we serve, right? Especially because we work with a lot of arts-based organizations, many of whom rely on ticket revenue, space rentals, gallery hostings, and public events. We started to see a sharp decline in revenue and therefore inability to contract us for services. So what we did with a lot of help from the Howard Gilman Foundation, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, we were able to provide subsidized, pro bono technical assistance to, I believe, over 100 artists of color in New York, with the majority of them being from Queens or Brooklyn, between the periods of, I believe, March when the pandemic started, and I think we started to wrap that up at the end of May. We spent about 400 hours on pro bono technical assistance, which often involved like knowledge and skill sharing, introduction to funders. And through that, we sort of understood the needs of our community in a different way. I swear I'm about to kick it over to Carolyn, that has continued to influence our programming. One of the things that we observed is that, there is absolutely a knowledge gap, among the artists and small businesses that we were serving. However, it's not for like lack of intelligence or skill. That is absolutely not true. The people we're working with are experts in their fields. But what we were seeing were a couple of things. First of all, an internalized belief that this sort of institutional funding and support was just never meant for them. Second of all, that they were just sort of not aware of the resources at their disposal. And third of all, especially when they are smaller organizations operating on a shoestring budget, a lot of these funding sources, especially like the government ones, can be a bit convoluted and a little difficult to understand. And if you're someone operating with a short staff, your internet was a business expense and you don't even know if you can afford that right now. Your internet connection may not be particularly stable. Your office space may not be particularly stable. You simply don't have the time to go looking through that stuff. And so a lot of people that we were sort of serving as we were providing pro bono technical assistance were experiencing just a sense of overwhelm and burnout, not being able to like complete it all. And that was, those are just some of the reasons why we were experiencing sort of funding obstacles for communities of color at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, our Rising Tides Research Institute has been doing a lot more with regards to that and a lot more in general. So I want to kick it over to Carolyn, who is our Director of Research, to explain more about what we've been doing there.
Thank you, Sammy, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here and wonderful to be engaging in this conversation right now. I wanted to address some of the research that Rising Tides has been doing, particularly in the Far Rockaways, East Flatbush, Jamaica, Brownsville areas. And I want to address it from the perspective of how Rising Tides has been doing research as it relates to arts entrepreneurship and business in these areas, particularly because, as we all know and has been widely reported, 50% of BIPOC business is closed during COVID, and that a lot of this can actually be tracked to longstanding systemic racism and inequities, but it is playing out along the digital divide in ways that I think are getting missed. And I also want to make sure that when I talk about businesses, that we're humanizing this discussion of businesses, that we're not just looking at this from the perspective of the bottom line, but that with business and entrepreneurship for all people, and certainly in communities of color, this is about livelihood and it's about community fabric and about families and the like. We surveyed approximately 80 local arts businesses, including nonprofits, and in our interviews and our findings, we're similar to what's already been mentioned, that too many businesses struggled with reliable internet access. They were using cellular data to conduct their work. They didn't have broadband, so they had slower business activities. And during COVID, as things were moving online, this obviously presented real challenges for them. Additionally, in the case of nonprofits, often staff and even in businesses, their leaders didn't always have a strong sense of how to use or leverage digital technology. So again, there's this issue of I've got it, but now how do I use it? And from the perspective of the digital divide and competitiveness, we found that even the ability to register online as an MWBE or as a city vendor were all impacted by this. And that this also impacted how businesses and nonprofits were tracking key performance indicators, their ability to maintain or expand their reach within their community or to provide services. So basically, in short, their pre-COVID viability, which was already lower because of lack of connectivity or issues around knowledge, access, and availability, impacted their overall business performance, their budgets, their growth, and that this certainly played into the loss of business during COVID, and again points back to systemic inequities that we are all here discussing today. So in light of COVID, kind of what we're witnessing with these businesses that did survive but continue to struggle with the digital divide is a growing gap in their competitiveness. And this is on top of the fact that so many already did close, and so that the fabric of these communities are already strained. And one of the areas that I'm very interested in taking this research into is looking at how this intersects with how COVID, the digital divide, are intersecting with other issues, particularly the opportunity zones in the Senator's district. Because opportunity zones will almost certainly bring more connectivity to the areas that we have looked at and to the arts businesses that we interviewed. However, as mentioned at the start of this panel, accessibility and affordability are different issues, but they intersect. Opportunity zones tend to attract new businesses for a variety of reasons that do deserve discussion, but I don't want to take up time here because I want to respect everybody's ability to participate today. But new businesses which come in tend to have higher operating budgets and more robust pre-existing understanding of business technical infrastructure compared to existing local businesses in the areas that are already struggling with the digital divide. And this gives these new businesses a competitive edge because there is a correlation between technological knowledge and access and business to viability at this point. So therefore, we're talking about a drastic local business identity shift in this district, and that's going to impact local communal bonds, which, as I've already said, they're already strained. People are really trying to find ways to connect, and communities are coming together in amazing and really incredible, inspiring ways, but I would like to see us make this easier for them and not harder. And just to say that one of the approaches that we're sort of taking with research right now is to partner with different organizations that do foot trafficking to help so we're doing case studies with businesses, and by following foot traffic, we're able to show businesses how they can use analytics to improve their customer service, but also to improve their service outreach. And then with the data that we collect, we're working with these local businesses with local business groups in order to help them lobby for better connectivity and better accessibility and training as well, because at the end of the day, we want more of these businesses to be registered as MWBEs and as city vendors to make them competitive in the JFK expansion and things of that nature, and to really continue to be able to support the culture and the community bonds that are there in Jamaica, in Avern, in the Far Rockaways, and in Brownsville, East Flatbush, and the other areas that quite a bit of our research is in. I'll pause there to take any questions for us, but so that's what Rising Tides is working on right now.
Thank you. I think I have more of a comment than a question before I open it up to everyone else. Is there any way, and I see Robert from Cornell still on the line as well as Savannah, that we can connect the Arts Business Collaborative to the work that Cornell's already doing around those various issues in the district?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think it would actually be really interesting, particularly around the lens of education, because we work with our arts nonprofits. They're businesses, right? Nonprofits do have this business component to them, but a lot of that, what we do is looking at arts education and things of that nature. And so how can we bring in the work of students in universities that are interested in this area into the work that we're doing as well? And also how are students who are members of these communities able to benefit? What do they really need? Because we are looking at arts businesses, but I think that there's a component around education that we have not had a chance to look at because of the way our grant is structured right now. So I think it would be wonderful to connect with that.
Yes, and we would certainly support that without any question. We do have, I'm going to turn my video on. Yes, we have actually within our college, we also have a fine arts program, both for undergraduate as well as graduates. So we would absolutely love to have a conversation with you about how we could collaborate and look for some opportunities. We have a facility in Lower Manhattan that actually supports the arts in a variety of ways. So there could be a number of both business but organizational capacities where we could work together. And certainly as part of our study, we're just in the very first semester of collaborating with the senator and his staff. So we could certainly expand that to look at broader issues of, say, economic opportunity for artists, as well as new forms of business collaboration. So very much open for that dialogue.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
And the same thing to Mr. Lindo and York College. We hope we can have a real collaboration with all of the students and colleges in the district.
We would love to establish that contact and maintain it. I really look forward to that.
And so now I would like to hear from some of the community folks. We have some leaders of some local nonprofits on the line. I see Trisha, I see Natasha, Ms. James is a big community leader. Anything you would like to say or add to the conversation? Oh, I see Donna. Hey, Donna, you're kind of the one who started a lot of this stuff off. You were the first one who come to me with this issue of the digital divide. So please jump in the conversation.
I had a question for the arts organization that was just speaking. I want to know, how would you or could you help an organization as myself, a nonprofit organization who caters to women in domestic violence shelters, where we offer art services as therapy for them to overcome certain situations. So the dilemma that I'm facing with my not-for-profit 501c3 organization is that we're not getting enough donors to donate like canvases and, paint and things like that. How would you be able to help an organization in that way?
So a couple of ways. I mean, already I have a couple of ideas just kind of off the top of my head. You're looking for in-kind services. You want people to donate in-kind, correct?
Yes.
I think that it's a matter of this is an initial thought, that I think a campaign around that would be great. I think a lot of people don't understand that you can also write off in-kind donations. And I say that only because a lot of people are particularly incentivized to give to nonprofits because it is tax deductible to a certain extent, as long as no goods or services are exchanged for their donation. Part of it can be like, let's emphasize that, donating goods and services is a tax deductible thing, as long as they can provide a receipt, to kind of certify the value of the monetary value of their contribution. But another thing is, I think that we can build a campaign around a drive of that nature. I think that personally, I'm already very inspired, and I would love to stay in touch with you because I would love to know how to support you. But in terms of what ABC would do for an organization like yours, is that we do offer technical assistance contracts, either as part of GAP or outside of GAP. And that is determined by whether or not it is a contract for which the client pays at standard market rate, or do you qualify for a subsidy, which would be based on your overall operating budget, your staff, and other sort of criteria there. So as part of a technical assistance contract, it can be any number of capacity building services. That would be we would have to negotiate that based on the client's needs. It can include anything from advising on fundraising and development, grant writing, prospecting, program design and implementation. Rising Tides is they're experts at measurements and evaluation. There are other, it would be depending on the organization's sort of overall needs, with the overall goal being of how can we increase your capacity as an organization to continue to service the communities you work with, to be able to connect you to greater networks and capital. How can we kind of provide that stepping stone to get you to a larger, where you want to be, and to get you to meet your goals. So I would love to keep talking with you about that. I know right now we're not taking new technical assistance contracts until until January, if I'm not mistaken. But I would love to, like, if you are interested, I would love to just start talking about it now to determine, like, is this a good fit? And, you know, because I would love to, you know, be able to support you and give some feedback.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
Sorry, that's
and yeah, Marvin definitely link us, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Brandon, you want to tell us who Queens Defenders are and what you guys do and how you fit into all of this, and what are you guys looking to do in the future around this issue?
I'd be happy to, Marvin. Thanks for looping me in. And thank you, everyone, from community leaders to the distinguished panel in Senator Sanders' office. Queens Defenders is a public defense firm. We also have an outreach division that is comprised of holistic services ranging from legal consultation, DV services, immigration services, youth empowerment. But more importantly, in this pandemic, we have been adding essential services into the mix. And to that end, we have adopted close to 100 families in the Rockaways, providing food on a weekly basis. We've also been providing through numerous partnerships with Food Bank, Campaign Against Hunger, 9 Million Reasons, between 800 to 1,200 boxes of food per week. I say that to say this with respect to the digital divide. It is apparent that the digital resources are extremely limited for folks beyond just the youth in schools or the families that might seem like they are the most struggling. I'd like to bring up the young men and women that are trying to achieve their GED. So they don't necessarily fall within that same scope that we might be able to just capture with that wide net. I'd like to reference the young adult that has aspiring goals in college. And quite frankly, because he's going to college, he doesn't have a computer. And he needs to figure out how to do that. And of course, I've heard a number of the panelists mention the data plan and the access. So I'd like to kind of summarize this with both a story and then a service scope, because I'm so happy that Marvin has been really advocating and pushing for this, because he is determined to find solution-based ways in which we can all work together. My story is that I came across a history clip that was referencing how expensive sugar was back in the 1800s. And, not to go into the complexities and the ramifications in that era, but I'd like to reference that right now, we couldn't in a million years fathom a world where people are struggling to get sugar because, especially in the Western society, because it's not as expensive. We have to find a way to make data plans, devices more affordable for those that are in need. We have at Queens Defenders a few, not a lot, I'd say in all honesty, about 7 to 9 Wi-Fi enabled tablets. I'm happy to say that since I'd say April to May into present day, we were actively going out into the community and servicing the community to assist with voter registration, getting them signed up, and of course the census. It was invaluable, and it was amazing how the community was coming out, because a lot of them did not have that access to even be able to check their voter registration or to fill out the census digitally. I would like to propose a way that and I know from the community leaders on this forum to the community leaders that may not have been able to find the time today, that we can find large enough areas outside to be able to provide people an opportunity to be socially distant using Wi-Fi enabled tablets or devices or resources, so that we can be able to properly serve those that need within pockets of times. It's not a cure-all, but it's a way in which perhaps we can all work together and actually still provide some of these services that might seem simple, but it's game-changing for many of our community residents. Libraries, some of them are open, some of them are not. I know firsthand from working in a library that a number of community residents would go to the library for hours just to be able to get online, to be able to set up for job opportunities, to be able to set up for food delivery for a senior. These are social liberties that have been removed that we have not found a way to properly serve. So if there's a way outside, socially distant, I have the team to be able to. We have young adult leaders, youth counselors that are willing to be able to go out to be able to serve the community in this manner. And I'd be happy to help for anybody that's interested. Thank you.
Hello, I'm definitely interested. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I am definitely interested. So I need to get your contact information, please.
Anybody who needs anyone's contact information, see Brittany, email Brittany. And again, thank you, Brittany, for putting all this together. Brittany will put everyone in touch with everybody. As a matter of fact, we're hoping, we're not hoping, this. I don't want anyone to think of this as just a one-off, that we're doing something and then we're going to go back. We really want to come out of this with all of the people that are here, forming a coalition to tackle this issue of the digital divide. It's going to take everyone, whether it's the private sector, whether it's the public sector, but mostly it's going to take you, the community leaders, to come up with the solutions to this idea. So this is just the beginning. We're going to come out of this and form a coalition and figure out how do we work on all of these issues simultaneously. And so all the information that was shown, the slides, everyone's contact information will be shared with everybody through Brittany.
Oh, hi. My name is Faye Hill. I'm a new district leader for Assembly 31. And this is a fantastic presentation. And we speak about the seniors, because the seniors, they don't have access, and they're and because of the COVID-19, we can't go into the nursing homes or even into the daycare, the centers that the seniors had access to. And this is a big problem because, as Senator Rendell mentioned, that his mother he had to go to his mother's house to access her computer to watch the service. And that's a big problem with the seniors, because even when they send out flyers from Senator Sanders' office, the seniors don't even know about what is available, whether food distribution or PPP. They don't have access to it. So how can that be addressed? And what is the cure for this? Because these seniors are being isolated. I'm lucky I'm a senior and I have all my computers ready because I'm always ready to learn. But there's seniors who are isolated, and we need to address the seniors in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you. That's going to be a big part of this. It's become, particularly with COVID spiking back up again, a big part of whatever we do going forward is going to have to be how do we address the seniors as well as the young people and everyone else. I see Trisha Bermudez on the call. You want to tell us about your organization and what it is you do in the community?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful forum. My name is Trisha Bermudez, and I am the CEO founder of Perfect Piece of the Puzzle. We support families of special needs children. I am the mom of an 8-year-old boy who has a rare chromosome deletion. He attends a District 75 school, and I found that throughout this whole pandemic, one of the most frustrating things has been the accessibility with the internet access. I'm a wonderful Spectrum customer, but with the amount of people that, when the pandemic first started, the amount of people that were online created a lag. And then to surmount that, the frustration of kind of supporting my child in, being a teacher's aide, being multiple therapists. I mean, that's one of the things, the least that you would want to expect is that even when you're doing teletherapy, and I caught a little bit of that presentation, that you would be able to communicate with your therapist for your child in the most effective way, instead of, did you hear me? Can you see me? I think I lost you. And that kind of creates the added snowball effect of, you know, kids with disabilities not being able to get the services, even though it's at home, in the way that they need it, which causes another trickle down effect of regression, and years of hard work and progress is lost. And I know we've spoken so much about the homeless shelters and the inaccessibility of internet access there, but we have a lot of students that live in homeless shelters that need this service, that have disabilities, that need to see their therapists, that need to see their counselors, and are losing out. And we're talking not losing out since September, we're going back to March and still don't have that access. It's quite a hard task. As a parent, I'm a single mom, and it's hard enough for me to manage trying to support my child, and I work from home at most times, and imagine the capacity that it takes for me to provide services for my child when I'm limited in my capabilities because of internet access. I know a lot of it, talk has also been about the hotspots. That's been on the forefront of my mind. And it's also been something that I would hope that my nonprofit can collaborate with, you know, anyone that would be able to help sponsor and fund getting some of these hotspots for our students, because they need it. They have devices and can't utilize them. And that to me doesn't make sense. So I really appreciate everybody. And then on top of that, Mr. Lindo, I know you said something about OT. You have teachers, students working with OT. I know that's also part of our issues for parents of students with disabilities. They have no clue how and what that looks like. And I would love to maybe collaborate with you in getting maybe a workshop going so parents can be able to learn and understand what OT is, what that looks like, and how to support their student. Because my son gets OT services, and I was lost for the past couple of months until I got a provider that was more knowledgeable and helpful. But I feel like I would be more equipped to do things on my end. And I know that's a lot of other parents. If they were more knowledgeable, they can be more effective at home, which, if in the event that the digital divide continues, they will have the tools and techniques already in place at home to do it without the internet service that there might be lacking. So thank you.
I think we heard from
Marvin,
everyone.
if I may,
Sure, yes, sir, please.
I just want to answer to Tricia. Tricia would be more than happy to get you in contact with our OT department. We are looking for additional ways that we can connect with our communities. What you mentioned about the distribution of devices without internet connection, it is a problem. It is a problem, and I can tell you that a lot of universities are addressing that, and CUNY in general, not just your college, is ensuring that when the student gets a device, we get to identify, do you have a way to connect to the internet? Otherwise, we'll provide you with a hotspot. Marvin, later, I would like to make sure that we take advantage of this forum to bring awareness to cybersecurity. It is so important to our communities, but I will do that only if there is time remaining after everybody participates. I will not hijack the.
Thank you. I think the only person we haven't heard from is Ms. James. How you doing this afternoon, Paula? You want to chime in for a couple minutes?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It was a pleasure hearing from each and every one of you and all these resources that are available. I'm an educator in charter. I'm a liaison from Calvary Baptist Church in Jamaica, Queens. And I'm also a parent of students in public school. Some of these resources I feel as an educator, as a parent, we really, really wish we knew were available. I have school officials from principals all the way down to teachers that would have loved to know about some of these resources. If there was a way that we could kind of gather them and roll them out so that community members like myself, educators like myself, would be able to share them with the relative, you know, portions of the community. I think that would be awesome because so many of you are doing such great work and so passionate about what you do. What I find is that as a parent, you know, in regards to like what Trisha said, dealing with the inoperable internet or lags, you know, children get discouraged in their learning. Also having a place to go with questions, to know where these trainings are for the seniors that are watching. The seniors, I forgot the name of the person who said that earlier. I'm so sorry, but that is a valuable resource also for us to tap into. There are so many seniors that want to help. There's so many seniors that want to know and need to know for themselves and for their grandchildren. I know Calvary itself has grandparent housing, so it's like a senior citizen home, but therefore mainly for seniors who are raising their grandchildren. And so there's so many different portions of the community that some of this outreach would be invaluable to. So I'm thankful to each and every one of you, but as Marvin had mentioned, I guess when Brittany is able to get this information out to all of us where we can share via email or website or however we could collaborate and get these things rolled out to everyone on a whole, I think that would be so helpful. So thank each and every one of you for what you do.
I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Lindo, you want to talk a little bit about cybersecurity? Senator Savino talked about this morning, but I think it is a very big issue. So you want to take some time to talk about that now?
Sure, and I'm sure that I'm hoping that this goes beyond this group. I'm not looking for us to just impact the 18 members of this group, but everybody who is listening. I personally believe that one of the consequences of this digital divide is that there is also a large exposure that is taking place of our personal data. We are so willing to give our data away, whether it's our cellular phone number, download that fashionable app on your phone that is going to give you a video game for free, or as simple as clicking on that link on that email that is offering you a $500 gift card. Nobody's giving money away. We need to be more critical into those aspects of how we manage our information. To me, that's first. That is how we manage our cyber practice. How do you manage yourself in front of your computer? And second is a technical portion. The technical portion is making sure that your computer is up to date with all the operating systems. So please know, for example, Windows stopped supporting Windows 7 over a year ago. So if you are using Windows 7 right now, all your data is being exposed, and Microsoft will tell you, I'm sorry, but we told you a year ago that we're not supporting Windows 7 anymore. So bring your computers to Windows 10. Make sure, if you're taking notes, please make sure that you do that. Make sure that you have an antivirus on your computer. Make sure that your device, your Android or iOS device is up to date. That you are not emailing your social security number to anybody. You would be surprised. There are still people out there that would ask, in order for you to get this job interview, we have to get your social security number. And the person is willing because that person needs a job. And by the way, in order for you to get this job, you're ready to go. You're going to start on Monday. We need your bank account. Can you please give us your bank account? And people are willingly providing this information. And a lot of seniors have lost their savings. And there's a lot of students, there are students that even lost their CARE Act money for scams that happened not too long ago. So we have to be aware of this. We are very close. We are very close to shopping season. We're already getting a lot of emails. We're already getting Thanksgiving, Black Friday. This is shopping season. This is shopping season for criminals. And I want you to think about this. Those criminals, they're not teenagers in their basement. This is organized crimes. This is the people that you see on the street. They are 30, 40, 50 years old. Organized. They're large companies underground that they go and they have a quota. Okay, Sammy, I'm gonna use you as an example. So Sammy, your quota for today is that you're gonna find 10 social security numbers today. And Sammy has to work and he gets paid for that. This is the way these companies are working. So it is making sure, in a nutshell, make sure that your technology is up to date and make sure that you are not giving your information away. It's not to anybody, but the people that you may think that you trust. Listen, if your college, if your bursar, if your financial aid is asking you for your social security number on an email, says, no, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. I give you my student ID number. I can find any other ways to demonstrate my identity, but I will not give you my social security number. Can I have your bank account? Seriously? And be more critical. Just think twice. And if you're not sure, talk to somebody else first. Hey, what do you think? Does this sound good to you? Look at this email. Does it sound good that this person is offering $550 a week to take care of a dog? Marvin, that's all I have. I just wanted to make sure that.
Thank you so much. That's very important because in the last few days, I hadn't really even thought much about cybersecurity. I've been so focused on the digital divide. So I appreciate you and Senator Savino bringing that issue to the forefront during this conversation.
Marvin, this is Randy Claycorn. Can I jump in on your security point? Yes. Thank you very much. My background is in information technology. I have served as what they call a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, as well as the CIO at Goodwill Industries. And to add to what the gentleman was saying, this goes back to training. The folks on this call have this understanding. We would probably not give that information, but I've come out of one of our major healthcare organizations, and folks have sent notes like that to physicians and say, hey, you can get your money faster. And they have sent them this information, doctors, MDs, folks that we think should know better. And some of our biggest cyber attacks have come to folks that have been able to get to our physicians and get them to send them information. The devices that are being provided to our students and to our seniors need to be up to date, need to be Windows 10, need to have the antivirus. The individuals that get these devices won't have that understanding, won't know when that little dot shows up at the bottom of the screen. They're supposed to click it to have their operating system get updated. We can't expect them to know that. We've got to tell them that and to see that those things occur. It has to be included in the training on an ongoing basis. They're going to click it because, especially today, you're talking about money. Like you said, you're talking about jobs. So us on this call need to see that the people we are looking to support with this initiative are provided with that information. all the devices that are being provided by the different vendors need to have that security built in. Folks aren't going to know to do that on their own. And if we're not doing that, then we need to see that they get that information and that those devices are protected. Otherwise, they're fully exposed. Thank you.
Completely agree with you, Anna.
Francisco, you've been with us all day, and I want to thank everybody. But you want to you're kind of an expert on building coalitions and doing different things. You want to try to tie this all in, and I want you to know what did you think of our panel and stuff today. So. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure that I added to, because I've actually been taking notes as well today, and just I've been doing a lot of work specifically with the New York State Reimagine Commission. And I do want to point out that I realize, especially when we're talking to communities that are not just in New York City, but also in some of the more rural parts of the state, some of the university towns like Syracuse or Rochester, and then also places like Albany. One of the things I want to make sure people do is that you actually engage in the process, even if you're disenchanted, with telling the state government what you want. I think that Governor Cuomo, by assembling the Reimagine Commission on Broadband, I think it's a good start. And I realize that this is not the first time that they've actually assembled a broadband coalition, but I always think that, or excuse me, commission, I think it's really important with these commissions that we give them a specific ask. So the thing is, if you want them to improve data, tell them what you want. Show that this is the FCC data. This is what they say about our, not only our community, but also maybe your county, and say, no, this is what it actually is. Give people specific stories so that they know what to take, whether it's in a hearing or via letter or even raising it on social media. I think very often we assume that people understand what's happening on the ground at your community's level. Another point that Assemblyman Vanel brought up, the issue about affordability. Affordability is one of the most difficult issues to solve because it doesn't matter which community you're talking to across the nation, there is no duplicate answer. So the thing is, we don't have a set framework of these are the different speed bands and these are the prices that are affordable. And what affordable means in New York is going to be very different than in Minneapolis or San Francisco. So what we need to do in terms of, if we're saying we're trying to solve a very mercurial problem, then we need to be able to have specific comparisons to say, yes, this is why $50 a month is more affordable, or $20 a month. This is a plan that works. Here we can show the take rates. I heard one of the comments from Charter about the program that they actually participated with. The FCC asked for providers to make a commitment to expand connectivity during the pandemic. One thing that concerns me when we're talking about these things is what's next. Because I think, yes, it's exciting when we have providers step up and do the right thing. However, they alone cannot provide solutions in the long term. So we need to be thinking about not just what happens in the next 6 months or the next year just to survive COVID. We really need to be thinking about restructuring, to think about there's an infrastructure problem, there's an adoption problem, there's a digital literacy problem, and making sure that everyone has their marching orders so that we're all moving in the same direction. So I think there are lots of important parts that are coming up here, but I implore people to see that this is enormous, so we all have to take one brick. So what's your brick? And if that means you're a writer, if that means you're an advocate, if that means you like digging into FCC data, if that means that you like standing in hearings at the, in the state capitol, like whatever's your piece, just do something, because I honestly feel like this is a community-wide endeavor.
And it's 2:15, and I know some of you have been here since 11 o'clock. So I want to see if anybody has any final words on anything before I turn it over to Brittany to give us closing remarks.
Hi, it's just Leona, again, just representing New York City educators. And just want to say this was a great forum to help build our optimism. We deal a lot about the digital divide, the access, the Wi-Fi, the broadband, but to know that companies such as Spectrum and all the small businesses and even the colleges with the hotspot provisions, which is trying, something is trying to be done, is hopeful to share with other educators as they speak to parents and deal with students that things are being discussed, like this forum. People are coming to the table on behalf of students, seniors, the youth, the college students. So I'm filled with a little bit more optimism that as we move further and further, if you're watching the news, New York City might be fully remote by Monday, that we will be in a better position than we were in March when the devices were first given out, taking into consideration that the need is this increased broadband, this access, this Wi-Fi in buildings such as New York City housing and shelters, which is a big population for New York City Department of Education, in addition to those households that have numerous children using iPads all at once. And we've discussed that on several other platforms. So I am hopeful that the conversation will not stop here and that it will continue to be pressed amongst government officials and those that have the voice that come to the table that represent the different telecommunications and computer and Wi-Fi and broadband aspects. And I look forward to what's to come regarding this. Thank you. Thank you for this today, Marvin and Brittany.
Thank you. And even for us in the senator's office, this is all a learning process. You know, we're trying to do better with technology as well. So bear with us as well. And it's important to have the support of the community as we try to figure this out.
Any other closing remarks?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to personally thank you all for coming out to today's
You can barely hear you.
You can't hear me?
A little better now.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming and participating in today's conversation. I concur that this was a very empowering talk, and I am optimistic for our future endeavors as far as tackling the digital divide goes. I do believe that we need to take a proactive posture in tackling these issues. We don't only want to continue to solve these problems as they emerge, but instead we need to try to create or establish a solid ecosystem to eliminate future problems before they emerge. And, you know, with the unpredictability of the climate of our country and COVID and everything, taking initiative now is of the utmost importance. So as Marvin stated, I will construct some type of document so we can organize our thoughts and activate all of these wonderful resources that we all have to bring to the table. And I'm looking forward to working with you all.
And just so everybody knows, Brittany's only been on the job 3 weeks, and this is what the senator has her doing. Great job, Brittany. And I want to thank all of the people who joined us today, Cornell, York College, all the community leaders, Spectrum, the Arts Business Collaborative, Senator Vanel, Senator Savino, and of course, Senator Sanders. But again, what I really want to thank is you, the community. We can't do this unless we all work together. And as Francisca said, there's a part for all of us. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a great day. Great Saturday.
Thank you.
Be well, stay safe.
Great. Thank you all.
Everybody be well and stay safe.